The phone call came at 2:47 a.m., shattering 15 months of carefully constructed silence. Elena Brooks had built a new life from the wreckage of her old one. A modest apartment in Boston's South End, a son she protected with fierce desperation, and a past she'd buried so deep she sometimes believed it had never happened. But the past doesn't stay buried when it's written in blood and DNA. When her 9-month-old son's fever spiked to 104 degrees and the ER doctor asked the question she'd been dreading, "We need the father's medical history," Elena learned that some debts can only be paid in truth, and some men can never truly be left behind. If you're ready for a story about dangerous love, impossible choices, and the lengths a mother will go to save her child, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain hammered against the emergency room windows like accusations Elena couldn't outrun. She sat rigid in a plastic chair that had probably witnessed 1,000 other nightmares, her arms wrapped around her middle as if she could physically hold herself together. Her baby, her beautiful, innocent baby, lay in the next room behind a curtain that might as well have been a wall of iron, his small body fighting a fever that had climbed so high, so fast, the pediatrician's face had gone pale. 9 months old. Lucas was only 9 months old, and already the sins of his parents were trying to claim him. "Ms. Brooks?" The doctor emerged from behind the curtain, his expression professionally neutral in that way medical professionals mastered when the news was bad. "We need to talk." Elena stood so quickly, the chair scraped against the linoleum with a sound like a scream. He's stable for now." The Doctor. Ramirez, according to his badge, gestured to a small consultation room off the main corridor. "But we need information." The consultation room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Elena perched on the edge of another plastic chair while Dr. Ramirez pulled up a tablet, his fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Your son is presenting with a severe febrile seizure and respiratory distress," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "We're running tests, but some of his symptoms are unusual. I need a complete family medical history, both sides." Elena's throat constricted. "I've already given you mine." "I know." Dr. Ramirez looked up, and there was kindness in his dark eyes, but also an unmistakable insistence. "I need the father's. Genetic conditions, drug allergies, any history of immune disorders, respiratory issues, seizures, anything that might help us understand what we're dealing with." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. Elena could feel her carefully constructed world cracking like ice under sudden weight. We're not in contact." "Ms. Brooks." Dr. Ramirez set down the tablet. "I'm not here to judge your personal situation. I'm here to save your son's life. If there's any way to reach the father, any way at all, now is the time." Elena closed her eyes. Behind her lids, she saw Marco as she'd last seen him, standing in the doorway of their Tribeca penthouse, his face a mask of cold fury as she told him she was leaving. She'd been 3 months pregnant, though she hadn't known it yet. She'd thought escape meant freedom. She'd been so catastrophically wrong. "I can try," she whispered. Dr. Ramirez nodded, rising. "Every minute counts." Alone in the consultation room, Elena pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She'd kept one thing from her old life, hidden in a locked app, available only in case of absolute emergency. A single phone number that she'd sworn she would never, ever use. Her finger hovered over the screen. 15 months. 15 months of silence, of hiding, of building a life where Marco DeLuca was nothing but a dangerous memory. One call would destroy all of it. One call would let him know not only where she was, but that she'd hidden his son from him. Marco DeLuca didn't forgive betrayal. He collected it, cataloged it, and eventually, always, he made people pay for it. But Lucas was burning up in the next room, and nothing else mattered. She pressed dial. The phone rang once, twice. At 3:15 in the morning, most people wouldn't answer an unknown number. But Marco DeLuca wasn't most people. He lived in a world where calls in the dead of night meant either opportunity or threat, and he never missed either one. "Who is this?" The voice was exactly as she remembered, dark whiskey and sharp edges, authority wrapped in a deceptively soft tone. Elena's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "It's me." Silence. Not the empty silence of a disconnected call, but the loaded silence of a world holding its breath. She could almost see him, wherever he was, whoever he was with, going completely still, his mind already racing through scenarios and strategies. Elena. Her name on his lips was a statement of fact, a question, and a threat all at once. "You have exactly 10 seconds to explain why you're calling me at 3 in the morning after disappearing for over a year. I need—" Her voice broke. She pressed her free hand against her mouth, fighting for control. "I need your medical history, family history, everything." "Why?" The single word was sharp as a blade. Elena forced herself to breathe, to think past the panic clawing at her chest. "Because our son is in the emergency room, and the doctors need to know if there's anything genetic that could be making him sick." The silence that followed was so profound that Elena pulled the phone away from her ear to make sure the call hadn't dropped. When Marco spoke again, his voice was different, colder, and more dangerous than she'd ever heard it. "Our what?" "Our son." The words tumbled out now, unstoppable. "I was pregnant when I left. I didn't know. I found out a few weeks later, and I couldn't— Marco, I'm not calling to fight or explain or— He's sick. He's really sick. The doctors need to know about your family, about any conditions that Bray— Where are you?" "Marco. Where are you?" The command in those 3 words was absolute. This was the voice that ran an empire built on fear and respect in equal measure. The voice that could order violence with the same ease as ordering coffee. Elena had forgotten how completely Marco could dominate a conversation when he chose to. "Boston Children's Hospital, but you don't need to come. I just need information." The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone in disbelief, then horror. She'd expected rage. She'd expected demands. She hadn't expected him to simply hang up. Was he coming? Was he so angry he'd refuse to help? Did he think this was some kind of trap? She burst out of the consultation room and nearly collided with a nurse. "My son, Lucas Brooks, is he—" "Still stable," the nurse assured her. "Dr. Ramirez is with him now. You can go back in if you'd like." Elena hurried through the curtain and found her baby hooked up to monitors and IVs, his small chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. Dr. Ramirez looked up from checking the readouts. "Were you able to reach the father?" Yes." He hung up. Elena moved to Lucas's bedside, stroking his dark hair with trembling fingers. "I don't know if he'll provide the information." "Keep trying," Dr. Ramirez said gently. "In the meantime, we're doing everything we can." The next hour passed in a blur of tests and consultations. Elena never left Lucas's side, watching the monitors like they held the secrets of the universe. His fever started to come down slightly with medication, but his breathing remained labored, and the doctors' faces remained grave. She was dozing in the chair beside his bed when the commotion started. It began as raised voices in the hallway, someone demanding access, someone else citing hospital policy. The voices grew louder, more insistent. Then suddenly the curtain was yanked aside with enough force to tear it from several hooks, and Marco DeLuca walked into the room like a conquering army. Elena shot to her feet, her heart hammering. She'd forgotten, or maybe she'd deliberately tried to forget, the sheer physical presence of the man. Marco was 6'3" of controlled power, dressed incongruously in what was obviously a bespoke suit despite the hour. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his gray eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that had once looked at her with something almost like tenderness, swept the room in a single assessing glance before locking onto the hospital bed. He went absolutely still. Elena watched emotions flicker across Marco's face too quickly to name: shock, recognition, something that might have been wonder. He moved toward the bed with the slow, careful steps of a man approaching something precious and breakable, his usual predatory grace tempered by what looked almost like fear. "He has your eyes," Elena said quietly, pointlessly. Marco didn't respond. He stared down at Lucas with an intensity that made Elena's chest ache. Very slowly, as if he was afraid the baby might shatter, Marco reached out and brushed one finger against Lucas's small hand. The baby's fingers reflexively curled around Marco's, and something in the crime lord's face cracked open. How old? 9 months. He was born June 15th. Marco's jaw tightened. 9 months. You've had him for 9 months and you never thought to tell me I had a son? I was protecting him. Elena kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. From your world, from your enemies, from everything that comes with being Marco DeLuca's child. By hiding him? By raising him alone? Marco finally tore his gaze from Lucas to look at her, and the fury in his eyes was incandescent. By denying him his father? By keeping him alive, Elena shot back. You think I don't know what happens to the families of men like you? I was married to you, Marco. I saw the security, the threats, the constant danger. I wasn't going to let my son grow up in that world. Our son. Marco's voice dropped to something deadly quiet. And you don't get to make that decision alone. A nurse poked her head through the curtain, her eyes wide. Sir, you can't be in here without authorization. I'm the father. Marco didn't even look at her. Get me Dr. Ramirez, now. Something in his tone made the nurse disappear without another word. Elena knew that tone. It was the one that made grown men reconsider their life choices. You called because you needed my medical history, Marco said, turning back to Lucas. What's wrong with him? Elena explained everything the doctors had told her, watching Marco's face grow progressively darker. When she finished, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Vincent, I need Dr. Sarah Chen at Boston Children's Hospital within the hour. I don't care what she's doing. I don't care if she's in surgery on the goddamn president. Get her here. He paused. And I need my family's complete medical records. Everything. Have them sent to... He glanced at Elena. What's his full name? Lucas Brooks. Marco's eyes flashed. Lucas Brooks DeLuca as of right now. Send everything to that patient file. He ended the call and looked at Elena with cold precision. My mother had an immune condition that presented with similar symptoms when she was young. If Lucas inherited it, we need to know immediately. You can't just, he's not legally, he's my son, Marco interrupted, his voice like steel. Legally, genetically, and in every other way that matters. We can discuss your monumental lapse in judgment later. Right now, I'm going to make sure he gets the best medical care money can buy. Dr. Ramirez appeared through the curtain, his expression wary. Mr. DeLuca, I presume? Doctor. Marco's tone was pure business now, the grief and anger locked away behind the mask he showed the world. What do you need to know? For the next 20 minutes, Elena watched as Marco provided a detailed family history with the same efficiency he brought to everything else. She learned things about his family she'd never known despite 2 years of marriage. His mother's autoimmune disorder, his grandfather's heart condition, a cousin who died young from complications of a genetic blood disorder. Dr. Ramirez took notes rapidly, his expression growing more focused. This is extremely helpful. The autoimmune angle is something we hadn't fully explored. I'm going to consult with our immunology specialist immediately. I've called in Dr. Sarah Chen from New York Presbyterian, Marco said. She's a pediatric immunologist, one of the best in the country. She'll be here within the hour. Dr. Ramirez's eyebrows rose, but he nodded. Any additional expertise would be welcome. I'll brief her when she arrives. After the doctor left, silence fell over the small space. Marco stood beside Lucas's bed, one hand resting gently on the railing, his eyes never leaving his son's face. Elena watched him, her emotions a tangled mess of fear, resentment, and something else she didn't want to name. How did you get here so fast? She asked finally. New York to Boston is at least a 4-hour drive. Helicopter, Marco said without looking at her. Landed on the roof 15 minutes ago. The hospital administrator was surprisingly cooperative once I explained the situation. Of course he'd taken a helicopter. Of course he'd simply overridden hospital protocol. That was who Marco was. A man who bent the world to his will through a combination of money, power, and absolute certainty that he deserved both. You can't just take over his care, Elena said quietly. I'm his mother. I've been his mother alone for 9 months. You can't just walk in and... And what? Marco turned to her, and the full force of his attention was like standing in a spotlight. Be his father. Provide for him. Protect him. Those are exactly the things I can and will do, Elena. You made your choice when you ran. Now you get to live with mine. He doesn't need your protection. He needs to get better. He needs both. Marco moved closer, and Elena fought the urge to step back. You think hiding in Boston kept him safe? You think living in that modest little apartment in the South End, shopping at the same grocery store every Tuesday, taking him to the same pediatrician every month, you think I wouldn't have found you if I'd been looking? Elena's blood ran cold. You knew? I know everything that happens in my world, Elena. Did you really think you could just disappear? Marco's smile was sharp and humorless. I knew where you were within a week of you leaving. I knew when you had the baby. I knew every goddamn detail of your new life. Then why didn't you, because you left. The words were quiet but devastating. You walked out, and I decided that maybe you were right. Maybe you were better off away from me. Maybe our child, a child I didn't even know existed, was safer with you than in my world. He looked back at Lucas. I was wrong. Marco, you made it 15 months, Elena. 15 months of pretending you could build a normal life. And the second something goes wrong, who do you call? Not your friends, not your family, me. Because deep down, you know the same thing I do. There is no escaping what we are, what we were, what we made together. Elena wanted to argue, but the words died in her throat. Because he was right, wasn't he? The moment crisis struck, her carefully constructed new life had collapsed like a house of cards, and she'd reached for the one person she knew could move heaven and earth if necessary. The one person she'd sworn she'd never need again. A new doctor arrived. Dr. Chen, immaculate despite the hour, her eyes sharp and assessing. Marco briefed her with the same precision he'd used with Dr. Ramirez, and Elena watched as the two physicians conferred over Lucas's chart. More tests were ordered. New medications were started. The whole operation shifted into a higher gear with the addition of Marco's resources. And through it all, Marco never left Lucas's side. Dawn was breaking over Boston when Lucas's fever finally started to come down in earnest. Dr. Chen emerged from a consultation with Dr. Ramirez, her expression cautiously optimistic. We believe we've identified the issue, she said, addressing both Elena and Marco. It appears to be an early presentation of the same autoimmune condition your mother had, Mr. DeLuca. We've started him on immune-suppressing medication, and he's responding well. He's not out of the woods yet, but his vitals are stabilizing. Elena felt her knees go weak with relief. Marco's hand shot out to steady her, his grip firm and warm on her elbow. She should have pulled away. She didn't. What's the long-term prognosis? Marco asked. With proper treatment and monitoring, excellent, Dr. Chen replied. It's manageable, especially when caught this early. He'll need regular checkups and medication adjustments as he grows, but there's no reason he can't live a normal, healthy life. Normal. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with irony. There was nothing normal about any of this. Not Lucas's sudden illness, not Marco's dramatic arrival, not the fact that they were standing together in a hospital room after more than a year of silence. After Dr. Chen left, Elena finally pulled away from Marco's touch. Thank you, she said quietly. For coming. For helping. For being his father? Marco's voice was harsh. Don't thank me for doing what I should have been doing all along. What I would have been doing if you hadn't hidden him from me. I did what I thought was right. You did what was easy. Marco turned to face her fully, and his eyes were chips of ice. You ran because staying was hard. Because loving me was complicated. Because you couldn't handle the reality of who I am and what my life requires. I left because I watched you kill a man, Elena said, her voice shaking. In our home, I watched you put 2 bullets in someone's head and then sit down to dinner like nothing had happened. That man had a family, Marco, a life, and you ended it without hesitation. That man was stealing from me and planning to testify against my organization. Marco's tone didn't change. He made his choice. I made mine. That's the world I live in, Elena. That's the world I warned you about before you agreed to marry me. Knowing about it and seeing it are different things. Then you should have left before you were pregnant. Marco's words were brutal in their honesty. You should have left before you created a child who deserves both his parents. Not a mother too scared to face reality, and a father who didn't know he existed. Elena flinched. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. Marco gestured to Lucas, peaceful now in his medicated sleep. He's 9 months old, Elena. 9 months I'll never get back. First words I won't hear. First steps I won't see. You stole that from me. From him. So no, I don't think fairness is something you get to claim right now. Before Elena could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices, the sound of rapid footsteps. Marco's entire demeanor changed in an instant. His hand moved to his waistband where Elena knew he kept a gun, his body shifting to place himself between the door and Lucas's bed. A man burst through the curtain, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had seen too much violence. He took in the scene in a single glance before focusing on Marco. We have a problem. Marco's expression didn't change. Vincent. What kind of problem? Vincent, who Elena vaguely remembered as one of Marco's most trusted men, glanced at her, then back to Marco. The kind we should discuss privately. Speak, Marco ordered. She's going to find out anyway. Vincent's jaw tightened. Constantine knows about the boy. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elena didn't know who Constantine was, but Marco's reaction told her everything she needed to know. His face went completely blank, and that was somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. How? Best guess? Someone at the hospital talked. You arriving by helicopter, demanding access, bringing in specialists. It made waves. Those waves reached the wrong ears. Secure the floor, Marco said immediately. I want our people on every entrance, every exit. No one gets near this room without my direct approval. Already done, Vincent replied. But Marco, he knows. And if Constantine knows, everyone knows. Marco finished the sentence, his voice grim. Which means we move, now. Elena found her voice. What are you talking about? Who's Constantine? Marco turned to her, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she saw something almost like regret in his eyes. Konstantin Volkov, head of the Russian Bratva on the East Coast. We've been at a delicate stalemate for the past 2 years. What does he have to do with Lucas? Everything. Marco moved back to the bed, looking down at his sleeping son. Power in my world isn't just about money or territory, Elena. It's about leverage. About finding weaknesses and exploiting them. For 2 years, Constantine has been searching for a way to tip the balance in his favor. You just handed it to him. Elena's stomach dropped. No, Lucas is sick. He's in the hospital. No one would... You don't know these people. Marco's voice was flat. You don't know what they're capable of. Constantine would kill a baby without hesitation if it gave him an advantage. And now he knows I have a son, an heir, a weakness. Then what do we do? Marco looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, calculation giving way to a decision that clearly cost him. We? He's my son too, Elena said, lifting her chin. I won't let anything happen to him. You couldn't stop it if you tried. Marco said it as simple fact, not cruelty. But you're right, he's your son. Which means you have a choice to make right now, and you need to make it fast. What choice? You can stay in Boston, keep trying to live your normal life, and hope Constantine decides a 9-month-old baby isn't worth the war it would start to hurt him. Marco's eyes bored into hers. Or you can accept that the second you called me, the second I walked through that door, you brought my world crashing back into yours. You can come with me, let me protect both of you, and admit that there was never any real escape. Elena looked from Marco to Lucas, her mind racing. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, it had all been an illusion, a pretty fantasy that had shattered the moment real danger appeared. If I go with you, she said slowly, what does that mean? It means you come back to New York. It means you live under my protection. It means Lucas grows up knowing his father and understanding the world he was born into. Marco paused. It means you give up the independence you fought so hard for and accept that some battles can't be won alone. And if I refuse? Marco's expression didn't change. Then I take Lucas anyway, and you spend the rest of your life wondering if your pride was worth losing your son. The words hit like a physical blow. You wouldn't. I would. There was no hesitation in Marco's voice. I let you go once because I thought it was what you needed. I won't make that mistake again, not when it comes to my son's safety. Elena wanted to call him a monster, wanted to scream that he couldn't just take her child. But she looked at Vincent standing guard at the door, thought about helicopter rides and private doctors and men who killed without hesitation, and she knew Marco absolutely could and would do exactly what he promised. The worst part was that he might even be right. How long do I have to decide? She asked, her voice barely audible. Lucas will be medically cleared to travel within 48 hours, Marco said. When he leaves this hospital, he leaves under my protection. The only question is whether you're coming too. Before Elena could respond, Dr. Chen returned with another update. Lucas's levels were continuing to improve. The crisis was passing. Her baby was going to be okay. But Elena's crisis was just beginning. She spent the next hour watching Marco interact with their son. The way he stood guard over the hospital bed like a sentinel, the gentle way he touched Lucas's small hand, the fierce protectiveness in every line of his body. This was a side of Marco she'd never seen, one she hadn't imagined existed beneath the cold exterior of the crime lord. He would protect Lucas with everything he had. Of that, Elena had no doubt. The question was whether she could live with what that protection would cost. As the sun rose fully over Boston, painting the hospital room in shades of gold, Elena made her decision. It wasn't the decision she wanted to make. It wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself or her son, but it was the only choice that kept them together. Okay, she said quietly. Marco looked up from Lucas's bedside. Okay, what? Okay, I'll come back to New York. I'll accept your protection. She had to force the words out. I'll let Lucas know his father. Something flickered in Marco's eyes, triumph, relief, maybe even gratitude, but his voice remained steady. Smart decision. I have conditions. Marco's eyebrow rose. You're not really in a position to negotiate, Elena. Nevertheless, she met his gaze steadily. I want my own space. Not your penthouse, not some apartment you control. Somewhere separate where Lucas and I can have our own life. No. Marco. No, he repeated firmly. You want safety, you get it my way. That means one location under one security system, where I know you're both protected. You'll have your own rooms, your own space, but you stay where I can keep you safe. Elena wanted to argue, but she could see the inflexibility in his face. Fine. Second condition. I'm not your wife. We're not together. We're co-parents, nothing more. This time Marco's smile was sharp. Agreed. Though you might want to remember that you're still legally my wife. We never filed for divorce. Elena's eyes widened. What? I sent the papers? Which I never signed. Marco's tone was casual, but his eyes were hard. An oversight on my part. I'm sure we can remedy it if you really want. Or we can leave things as they are. Either way doesn't change the current situation. Elena felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. She was still married to Marco? How had she not known? But then she'd been so focused on running, on hiding, on building a new life. She'd never followed up, never checked to make sure the divorce was finalized. Another mistake in a long line of them. Third condition, she said, pushing forward. I want to work. I'm not going to be some kept woman sitting around your house all day. Fine. I'll arrange something suitable. I'll arrange something suitable, Elena corrected. I don't need your permission or your assistance to have a career, Marco. For the first time since he'd arrived, Marco smiled. A real smile. Not the shark's grin he used in business. There she is. I was wondering when the woman I married would show up. I'm not that woman anymore. No, Marco agreed, his smile fading. You're the woman who hid my son from me for 9 months. You're going to have to work very hard to earn back even a fraction of the trust you destroyed. But he looked down at Lucas. For his sake, I'm willing to try. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. But it was a start. Dr. Chen kept Lucas for observation for another 36 hours. In that time, Elena watched as Marco systematically transformed the hospital floor into a fortress. More of his men appeared, taking up positions at every entrance. The staff grew accustomed to running security checks through Vincent before entering Lucas's room. Other patients were quietly moved to different floors. Marco never left except for brief phone calls, which he took in the hallway with Vincent standing guard. Elena caught glimpses of the empire he ran through those conversations. Business deals worth millions, territory disputes, personnel problems that required his personal attention. He handled it all with the same efficiency he brought to everything else, then returned to Lucas's bedside as if he'd never left. On the second night, Elena fell asleep in the chair beside Lucas's bed and woke to find a blanket draped over her shoulders. Marco sat in the other chair, his eyes closed, but his posture suggesting he wasn't really sleeping, just resting while remaining alert for any threat. "You should go home," she said quietly. "Get some real rest." Marco's eyes opened. "I am home. Wherever my son is, that's home." The simple statement hit harder than any declaration of love ever had. Elena looked away, uncomfortable with the emotion it stirred in her chest. "I'm sorry," she said finally, "for hiding him from you, for running, for all of it." Marco was quiet for so long that Elena thought he might not respond. When he did, his voice was carefully neutral. "You did what you thought you had to do. I can't fault you for that, even if I hate the choice you made." "I was scared." "I know." Marco looked at her across the dimly lit room. "I'm a lot of things, Elena. Most of them not good. But I never would have hurt you, and I never would have let anything happen to our child." "I know that now," Elena admitted. "I think I always knew it. I couldn't reconcile the man who was gentle with me with the man who could kill without hesitation." "Those men are the same person," Marco said quietly. "I've never lied about who I am or what I do. The violence isn't separate from the rest of me. It's all part of the same package." "I understand that now, too." "Do you?" Marco leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Because if you're coming back into my life, Elena, you need to really understand. This isn't a temporary arrangement. This isn't something we can try out and walk away from if it gets hard. The moment Constantine knows about Lucas, the moment the rest of my world knows I have a son, everything changes. There's no going back to Boston, no going back to normal. You're in this completely, or you're not in it at all." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I understand. Then we have an agreement." Marco stood, crossing to Lucas's bedside. He looked down at their sleeping son, and his expression softened in a way Elena had rarely seen. "I'm going to give him everything, Elena. Every opportunity, every advantage, every protection I can provide. He's going to grow up knowing he's loved and valued and safe." "And what about what he'll know about how you make your living?" "I'll teach him the truth," Marco said simply. "When he's old enough to understand, I'll explain exactly what our family does and why. I won't lie to him the way so many others in this business lie to their children. He deserves honesty." It was, Elena thought, perhaps the most frightening thing Marco had said yet. Not because it was wrong, but because it was so completely, terrifyingly right. On the morning of the third day, Dr. Chen cleared Lucas for discharge. Marco had already arranged everything: a medical transport to New York, a full pediatric team on standby at New York Presbyterian, and a convoy that would have been more appropriate for moving ahead of state. "Is all this really necessary?" Elena asked as she watched Vincent coordinate with hospital security. "Yes," Marco said flatly. "Constantine's people will be watching. The show of force isn't just about protection, it's about sending a message. My son is under my care now, and anyone who comes near him will regret it." The trip back to New York was surreal. Elena held Lucas in a specially equipped medical vehicle while Marco sat across from them, his phone constantly buzzing with updates. They were surrounded by a motorcade that would have made the president envious, and when they crossed into New York, Elena spotted men on motorcycles flanking them at every intersection. This was Marco's world. This was the reality she'd brought her son into. The penthouse hadn't changed much in 15 months. The same stunning views of Manhattan, the same expensive furniture, the same sense of controlled luxury that had always made Elena feel slightly uncomfortable. But now there was a nursery, fully equipped and clearly newly installed, and her old rooms had been cleaned and prepared as if she'd never left. "The nursery connects to your bedroom," Marco explained as they walked through. My room is down the hall. There's a panic room accessible from 3 different locations, and the entire floor is monitored 24/7. This is insane, Elena murmured, looking at the bulletproof windows. This is necessary, Marco corrected. Lucas is the heir to everything I've built. That makes him the most valuable target in New York. Elena wanted to argue, but she was too exhausted. The past 3 days had drained her completely, and all she wanted was to put Lucas down in his new crib and sleep for about 12 hours. Marco seemed to understand. Get some rest, he said, surprising her with his gentleness. We'll talk about the details tomorrow. But as Elena was putting Lucas down, she heard voices from the hallway. Marco and Vincent talking in low, urgent tones. She moved closer to the door, shamelessly eavesdropping. Confirmed sighting near the building, Vincent was saying. Constantine's people are watching. Let them watch, Marco replied. They need to see that the boy is protected, that any move against him would be suicide. They're not going to just back off, Marco. Constantine's been looking for an opening for 2 years. This is exactly what he needed. I know. There was something grim in Marco's voice. Which is why we need to move first. Set up a meeting, neutral ground. I want to make it very clear what the consequences would be if he even thinks about touching my family. That's a risk. Face-to-face with Constantine. Everything is a risk now, Marco interrupted. The moment Elena called me, the moment I acknowledged Lucas, we entered a new game. And in this game, the best defense is making sure everyone understands what they're up against. Elena backed away from the door, her heart pounding. She'd known there would be danger. She'd accepted it as the price of keeping Lucas safe. But hearing Marco discuss it so clinically, planning meetings with men who would kill a baby without hesitation, it drove home just how completely her life had changed. She looked down at Lucas, peaceful in his crib, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around him. I'm sorry, she whispered to her sleeping son. I'm so sorry I brought you into this world. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Because looking at Lucas's perfect face, those gray eyes so much like his father's, that determination already visible even in infancy, Elena couldn't bring herself to regret his existence. She could only hope she was strong enough to protect him from the consequences of it. The first week back in Marco's world passed in a blur of heightened security and careful negotiation. Elena woke each morning in rooms that felt both familiar and foreign, the ghost of her old life haunting every corner while the reality of her new situation pressed in from all sides. Lucas thrived under the care of the pediatric team Marco had assembled, his medication carefully monitored, his recovery progressing exactly as Dr. Chen had predicted. But while her son healed, Elena felt herself fragmenting under the weight of what she'd agreed to. Marco was everywhere and nowhere. He appeared at breakfast to check on Lucas, spent hours in his office conducting business she tried not to think about too carefully, emerged for dinner with the expectation that they would eat together like some twisted version of a family. He was unfailingly polite to Elena, distant but not cold, treating her with the careful courtesy of a business associate rather than the woman he'd once loved enough to marry. It was, she thought, somehow worse than anger would have been. On the 8th morning, Elena woke to find Marco already in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair with Lucas in his arms. He was reading from a children's book in Italian, his voice soft and melodic in a way she'd forgotten it could be. Lucas watched his father with wide, serious eyes, one small hand wrapped around Marco's finger. I didn't know you spoke Italian to him, Elena said from the doorway. Marco looked up, unsurprised by her presence. My grandfather used to read to me in Italian. I want Lucas to know where he comes from. He comes from me too, Elena said before she could stop herself. Not just your world. I'm aware. Marco returned his attention to the book, finishing the page before setting it aside. Which is why I've arranged for you to meet with someone today. Elena felt her guard rise immediately. Who? Her name is Margaret Chen. She's a family counselor who specializes in high-conflict co-parenting situations. Marco stood, settling Lucas against his shoulder with practiced ease. I thought it might be helpful for us to establish some ground rules with professional guidance. You mean you want a referee to make sure I don't try to run again? Marco's eyes hardened slightly. I mean, I want us to figure out how to raise our son without destroying each other in the process. But if you'd rather keep sniping at everything I do, we can skip the counselor and just fight it out ourselves. Elena took a breath, forcing herself to be rational. No, you're right. I'm sorry. A counselor is a good idea. The surprise on Marco's face was almost worth the admission. He'd expected a fight, she realized. He'd braced for her resistance. Her agreement had thrown him off balance, and there was something satisfying about that. She'll be here at 2, Marco said, recovering quickly. Vincent will bring her up. Does she know who you are? What you do? She knows I'm a businessman with security concerns. She doesn't need to know more than that. Marco moved toward the door, pausing beside Elena. And Elena? Try not to tell her about the parts of my business that might make her feel obligated to call the police. It wasn't a threat, just a statement of fact. Elena nodded, and Marco left with Lucas, heading toward the kitchen for breakfast. She stood alone in the nursery, surrounded by expensive furniture and high-tech monitors, and wondered how her life had become something that required coached conversations with professionals just to function. Margaret Chen arrived precisely at 2, a composed woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an air of competent warmth. Vincent showed her into the living room where Elena and Marco waited on opposite ends of a sofa, a physical distance that probably told the counselor everything she needed to know. Thank you both for agreeing to meet with me, Margaret said, settling into an armchair across from them. I understand you're navigating a complicated co-parenting situation. That's one way to put it, Elena said. Margaret smiled slightly. Why don't we start with each of you telling me, in your own words, what you hope to achieve through this process? Marco gestured for Elena to go first. She gathered her thoughts carefully, aware that everything she said would be analyzed, catalogued, potentially used against her later. I want Lucas to have a relationship with his father, she began. I want him to be safe, healthy, and happy. And I want to maintain my own identity and independence while we figure out how to raise him together. Margaret made a note. And you, Mr. DeLuca? I want my son to know he has a father who will protect him and provide for him, Marco said evenly. I want Elena to feel secure enough that she doesn't feel the need to run again. And I want us to establish clear boundaries and expectations so we're not constantly at odds. Those all sound like reasonable goals, Margaret said. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Elena, you mentioned that you left Mr. DeLuca and hid your pregnancy from him. Can you tell me what drove that decision? Elena glanced at Marco, whose expression remained neutral. I was afraid of his lifestyle, of the danger that came with being part of his world. I thought Lucas would be safer if we disappeared. And were you right? Margaret asked gently. Was he safer? The question hit like a punch to the gut. Elena thought about the hospital, about Marco's arrival and the resources he'd commanded, about Konstantin Volkov and the very real threat he represented. No, she admitted quietly. I was wrong. That must be difficult to acknowledge, Margaret said. Mr. DeLuca, how did you feel when you discovered you had a son? Marco was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. Betrayed, furious, and then terrified because I realized he'd been vulnerable for 9 months without my protection. You use the word protection a lot, Margaret observed. Both of you do. Can we talk about what that means in practical terms? And so began a conversation that was simultaneously excruciating and necessary. Margaret guided them through discussions about custody arrangements, decision-making authority, communication protocols. Elena learned that Marco had no intention of ever letting Lucas out of his sight for more than a few hours, which sparked their first real argument of the session. He's not a possession you can lock up, Elena snapped. He's a child who needs normal experiences. He's my heir who needs to survive to adulthood, Marco countered. Normal went out the window the moment you called me from that hospital. So what, he just grows up in a gilded cage? Never goes to school, never has friends, never experiences anything that isn't filtered through your security protocols? He experiences everything, with appropriate precautions. Margaret held up a hand. I'm hearing 2 different approaches to safety here. Elena, it sounds like you value normalcy and typical childhood experiences. Marco, you're prioritizing physical security. Is there a middle ground? No, Marco said flatly. Yes, Elena said at the same time. They glared at each other across the sofa. Margaret made another note. Let's try this differently, she suggested. What are your non-negotiables, the absolute requirements you each have for Lucas's upbringing? Marco went first. He lives with me. He has 24/7 security. All major decisions go through me. And Elena doesn't take him anywhere without my knowledge and approval. Elena felt her temper flare. So I'm just an incubator you keep around for Lucas's benefit? You're his mother, Marco said, his voice hard. But you've proven you can't be trusted to make decisions about his safety. So yes, those are my non-negotiables. Then here are mine, Elena shot back. I have equal say in his medical care, education, and daily routine. I'm not asking your permission every time I want to take him to the park, and you don't get to veto my parenting choices just because you have more money and guns. The guns are exactly why you should listen to me, Marco said, coldly. I know the threats, you don't. I know our son deserves better than growing up afraid of his own shadow. Enough, Margaret's voice cut through the rising tension. I can see we're not going to solve everything today, but I want you both to hear something important. You're both right, and you're both wrong. That got their attention. Marco and Elena turned to look at her, temporarily united in their confusion. Elena, you're right that Lucas needs normalcy and childhood experiences, Margaret continued. Children who grow up in overly restrictive environments often struggle with anxiety and difficulty regulating their own risk assessment. But Marco, you're right that there are real threats that need to be addressed. The question isn't who's right, it's how you balance both truths. How? Elena asked, genuinely curious. Margaret leaned forward. By compromise. By communication. By recognizing that you're on the same team even when it doesn't feel like it. Lucas needs a mother who can give him warmth and normalcy, and a father who can give him security and structure. He needs both of you, working together. The session continued for another hour, with Margaret pushing them toward concrete agreements. By the end, they'd established a framework. Elena would have primary day-to-day parenting responsibilities, while Marco provided security and made final decisions on major issues. They would communicate daily about Lucas's schedule and needs, and they would meet with Margaret weekly to work through conflicts before they escalated. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. After Margaret left, Elena found herself alone with Marco in the living room. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. I meant what I said, Marco said finally, about not trusting you. Elena flinched. I know, but I'm willing to try. He turned to face her fully. For Lucas, I'm willing to work on this, to find a way to coexist. Are you? Elena met his eyes and saw beneath the coldness something that looked almost like hope. This man had flown to Boston in the middle of the night, had moved heaven and earth to save their son, had arranged counseling despite surely seeing it as a sign of weakness. He was trying in his own complicated way. She could try too. Yes, she said. I'm willing to try. Marco nodded once, then headed toward his office. Elena watched him go, wondering if they were building something new or just delaying the inevitable collapse. The next few days settled into an uneasy routine. Elena spent her mornings with Lucas, taking him to the penthouse's private terrace for fresh air under Vincent's watchful eye. Afternoons were dedicated to job searching. She'd meant what she said about wanting to work, and Marco hadn't interfered when she'd started sending out resumes. Evenings meant family dinners that felt like elaborate performances, all three of them playing roles they hadn't quite figured out yet. On the fourth day after the counseling session, Elena's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously. Mrs. DeLuca? The voice was female, professional, with a hint of an Eastern European accent. Elena's stomach dropped. No one had called her that in over a year. Who is this? A friend. I'm calling to give you a warning. I don't know what you're talking about. Your husband has made enemies, the woman interrupted. Powerful enemies who know about the child. You think his security can protect you, but you're wrong. There are cracks in every armor, Mrs. DeLuca, and we know how to find them. The line went dead. Elena stood frozen in the middle of the nursery, her phone clutched in her white-knuckled hand. She should tell Marco. She knew she should tell Marco immediately. But something stopped her. That voice, that warning, it had felt almost gentle, like genuine concern rather than threat. Vincent appeared in the doorway. Everything all right, Mrs. DeLuca? Elena forced herself to breathe normally. Fine, just a spam call. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly, and Elena realized he probably knew she was lying. But he simply nodded and retreated, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts and the terrible weight of another secret. That evening at dinner, Marco was distracted, his phone buzzing constantly with messages he read and dismissed with increasing irritation. Lucas sat in his high chair between them, happily destroying a bowl of applesauce and getting more on himself than in his mouth. Problem? Elena asked, trying to sound casual. Marco set his phone down with more force than necessary. Constantine's people have been probing our territory, nothing direct, just testing boundaries, seeing how far they can push. Is that normal? It's escalation. Marco's jaw was tight. He's making a move, trying to force my hand. I'm meeting with him tomorrow night. Elena's fork clattered against her plate. You're what? It's necessary. We need to establish clear lines before this turns into open warfare. Marco, that woman said. Elena caught herself too late. Marco's eyes sharpened instantly. What woman? Elena cursed internally. She could lie, but Marco would see through it. She could deflect, but that would only make him more suspicious. Or she could tell the truth and deal with the consequences. I got a call today, she said slowly. A woman with an accent. She called me Mrs. DeLuca and warned me about cracks in your security. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Marco was on his feet instantly, his phone out, barking orders to someone on the other end. Elena heard him demand a full security sweep, a trace on all calls to her number, increased monitoring of all communications. When he hung up, his fury was palpable. And you didn't think to mention this immediately? I didn't know if it was real, Elena said, hating how defensive she sounded. It could have been a prank, or it could have been Constantine's people letting you know they can reach you anytime they want. Marco moved toward her, his eyes blazing. Do you understand how serious this is? They called your personal cell phone, Elena. They know your number. They know you're here. And you didn't think that was worth mentioning? I'm sorry, You just what? Decided to keep another secret? Decided information about our safety wasn't important enough to share? Marco's voice was cutting. How am I supposed to protect you if you won't tell me when you're threatened? I didn't think. That's the problem. Marco slammed his hand on the table, making Elena jump. You don't think. You react, you hide. You make unilateral decisions that put all of us at risk. When will you learn that we're past the point where you get to handle things alone? Elena stood, her own anger rising to meet his. I'm not one of your soldiers, Marco. You don't get to bark orders at me and expect blind obedience. I expect you to have enough sense to recognize a threat when you hear one. Lucas began to cry, frightened by the raised voices. Elena immediately went to him, lifting him from his high chair and soothing him against her shoulder. Over their son's dark head, she glared at Marco. This is exactly why I left, she said coldly, because everything with you is control and commands and absolute authority. Because you can't imagine a world where someone doesn't follow your orders without question. And this is exactly why you came back, Marco countered. Because when real danger shows up, you need me. You need my control and my authority and my ability to keep you safe despite your best efforts to sabotage it. They stared at each other across the dining room, years of resentment and hurt crystallizing in the space between them. Lucas's cries subsided to hiccups, his small fist clutching Elena's shirt. I'm taking him to bed, Elena said finally. We can discuss this later when we're both calm. We're discussing it now, Marco said. Vincent. Vincent appeared so quickly he'd obviously been listening in the hall. Sir? No calls in or out of the penthouse without security clearance. Elena's phone gets a new number tomorrow, and all her communications get routed through our filters. Understood. Wait, Elena protested. You can't just... I can and I am. Marco's voice was flat. You proved tonight that you don't take security seriously, so I'm taking the decision out of your hands. Elena wanted to argue, but Lucas was squirming in her arms, still upset. She carried him toward the nursery, her mind churning with fury and frustration, and the terrible knowledge that Marco was right. She had made a mistake by not reporting the call immediately. She was putting Lucas to bed when Marco appeared in the doorway. I'm not apologizing for protecting you, he said without preamble. I don't expect you to. Elena kept her back to him, focusing on tucking the blanket around Lucas. But I'm also not apologizing for wanting some autonomy in my own life. Even when that autonomy puts you at risk? Even then, Elena turned to face him. Because the alternative is being a prisoner in a golden cage, and I won't live like that, not even for safety. Marco studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Margaret said we need to compromise. She did. So here's my compromise. Marco moved into the room, keeping his voice low so as not to disturb Lucas. You tell me everything. Every threat, every weird call, every moment where something feels off. You give me that, and I'll give you as much freedom as I safely can. But if you hide things from me, if you keep secrets about security issues, then I make all the decisions, unilaterally, non-negotiably. It was, Elena realized, as close to reasonable as Marco was likely to get. And who decides what constitutes a security issue? We discuss it. You tell me. I assess the threat level. We decide together how to respond. Together, Elena repeated. Not you deciding and informing me? Together, Marco confirmed, as long as you hold up your end. Elena looked down at Lucas, peaceful in his crib, blissfully unaware of the negotiations happening over his sleeping form. She thought about the phone call, about the woman's warning, about the very real danger that lurked beyond these walls. All right, she said. I'll tell you everything, but Marco, I need you to trust that I'm on your side, on Lucas's side. I'm not trying to sabotage anything. I'm just trying to figure out how to live in this world. I know. Marco's voice was softer now. And I'm trying to figure out how to let you in without losing control of the situation entirely. We're both learning. It was, Elena thought, the most honest conversation they'd had since her return. And maybe that was progress. The next morning, Elena woke to find the penthouse in lockdown mode. Additional security personnel filled the halls, and Marco was in his office with Vincent and several other men Elena recognized from her previous life. Enforcers, strategists, the inner circle of Marco's organization. She knocked on the office door, and conversation ceased immediately. I need to speak with you, she said to Marco. Alone. Marco's eyebrows rose, but he dismissed the others with a gesture. When the door closed behind them, leaving just Elena and Marco in the spacious office, he leaned against his desk and crossed his arms. What is it? Elena gathered her courage. I want to know about Constantine, about the real threat he represents. If I'm going to live in this world, if Lucas is going to grow up in it, I need to understand what we're actually facing. Marco was quiet for a moment, studying her face. You sure you want to know? No, but I need to anyway. So Marco told her. He explained Konstantin Volkov's rise through the Russian mob, his eventual control of most of the Eastern European criminal networks on the East Coast, his long-standing rivalry with Marco's organization. He described territories divided by invisible lines, alliances maintained through violence and mutual benefit, the delicate balance of power that had held for the past 3 years. And now Lucas disrupts that balance, Elena said when he finished. Now Lucas changes everything, Marco confirmed. Constantine has no children, no obvious heir. If something happens to him, his organization splinters. But me, I have a son now. Succession is assured. That makes me stronger in the long term, which makes Constantine nervous. So what does he want? Leverage. Information. Maybe to force me into a position where I have to choose between Lucas and my territory. Marco's face was grim. He's going to push until he finds a weakness he can exploit. And the meeting tonight is me pushing back, reminding him that attacking my family would start a war he can't win. Elena absorbed this, her mind working through implications and possibilities. What if there was another way? What do you mean? What if instead of threatening each other, you found a way to make Lucas irrelevant to the power balance? Elena moved closer, her idea crystallizing as she spoke. You said Constantine has no heir. What if that's not a weakness but an opportunity? What if you positioned yourself as an ally rather than a rival? Marco's eyes sharpened. Keep talking. I don't know the details of your business, Elena said carefully. But from what you've told me, you and Constantine are in constant competition. Territory, resources, influence. But competition only works when you're fighting over the same things, What if you found complementary interests instead? Ways to cooperate that make you both stronger. Constantine doesn't cooperate. He dominates or destroys. Because that's what he thinks he has to do to survive. Elena was warming to her theme now. But if you could show him a different path, one where Lucas isn't a threat, but potentially an asset, what if you could broker a peace that benefits both of you? Marco was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. You're suggesting an alliance. I'm suggesting you stop seeing him only as an enemy and start seeing him as a potential partner. Maybe not in everything, but in enough areas that attacking your family becomes counterproductive. It would require giving up ground, sharing power I've spent years accumulating. It would require strategic thinking instead of just force. Elena met his eyes steadily. You're good at force, Marco. You've proven that. But maybe it's time to try something different. Marco pushed off from the desk, moving to the windows that overlooked Manhattan. You know, he said after a moment, this is the woman I married. Smart, strategic, seeing angles no one else considers. I'm still that woman, Elena said quietly. I never stopped being her. I just forgot for a while. Marco turned to face her. If I pursue this path, if I try to find common ground with Constantine, it could backfire. It could be seen as weakness. Or it could be seen as strength, as confidence, as a man secure enough in his power that he doesn't need to fight every battle. You make it sound simple. I'm sure it's not. But neither is raising a child in the middle of a war zone. Marco smiled slightly, and for a moment Elena saw the man she'd fallen in love with, sharp, calculating, but also capable of appreciating cleverness when he saw it. I'll consider it. But Elena, if I do this, if I try your approach, I need you all in. No more secrets, no more running, no more divided loyalties. All in, Elena agreed. We're a team, partners, for Lucas. For Lucas, Marco echoed. But something in his eyes suggested he was thinking of more than just their son. The meeting with Constantine was scheduled for midnight at a neutral location, a restaurant in Brighton Beach that had been closed for a private event. Marco spent the afternoon preparing, reviewing intelligence reports and strategy briefs with Vincent and his other lieutenants. Elena watched from a distance, seeing her husband in his element, and realized she'd never truly understood the scope of what he managed until now. At 11:30, Marco emerged from his office dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his expression set in lines of cold authority. He found Elena in the living room, reading while monitoring the baby monitor. I'll be back by 3 at the latest, he said. Elena stood. Be careful. Always. Marco hesitated, then added, if something goes wrong, Vincent has instructions. He'll get you and Lucas to a safe location. Nothing's going to go wrong. Probably not. But I plan for every contingency. Marco moved toward the door, then paused. Elena, thank you. For the suggestion about finding common ground, it's worth exploring. After he left, Elena tried to read but couldn't focus. She checked on Lucas 3 times in 20 minutes, reassured herself that Vincent and his team had the penthouse locked down tight, and generally drove herself slowly crazy with worry. At 1:45 in the morning, her phone rang. The new secure phone Marco's people had given her. She answered instantly. Elena. Marco's voice sounded tired but satisfied. We have an agreement. Preliminary, needs to be formalized, but Constantine agreed to back off in exchange for cooperation on some mutual interests. Relief flooded through her. That's wonderful. It's a start. I'll tell you more when I get home. A pause. You were right. Sometimes strategy works better than force. Sometimes, Elena agreed. Not always. Marco laughed, surprising her. No, not always. But tonight it did. I'll see you soon. Elena hung up and let herself smile. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to make this work after all. But her smile faded when she heard the crash from the hallway. Then Vincent's shout, cut off abruptly. Then gunfire, sharp and sudden in the night. Someone had breached the penthouse, and Marco was 20 minutes away. Elena's training kicked in before conscious thought. The muscle memory from those early months with Marco when he'd insisted she learn basic self-defense and crisis protocols. She was moving toward the nursery before the second shot rang out, her phone clutched in one hand while the other reached for the panic button hidden beneath the side table. She pressed it hard enough to hurt her thumb, then scooped Lucas from his crib. He woke with a startled cry, and Elena pressed him against her shoulder, one hand cupping his head protectively. "Shh, baby," she whispered, moving toward the reinforced door that connected the nursery to the panic room Marco had shown her on her first day back. Her fingers found the biometric scanner, and she heard the heavy locks disengage with a mechanical thunk that seemed impossibly loud. More gunfire erupted from the hallway, men shouting in Russian, Vincent's voice commanding his team to fall back and protect the primary targets. Elena shoved through the panic room door and slammed it behind her, engaging the locks from the inside. The room was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 10 feet by 12, but outfitted with everything Marco's paranoia had deemed necessary. Reinforced walls, independent air supply, monitors showing feeds from every camera in the penthouse, a weapons locker, and a secure communications system with a direct line to Marco's phone. Elena's hands shook as she strapped Lucas into the specially designed infant carrier, bolted to the floor, then grabbed the phone. It rang twice before Marco answered. "I know," he said before she could speak. Vincent triggered the alert. "We're en route. ETA, 12 minutes. Are you and Lucas in the panic room?" "Yes." "Marco, what's happening? Who?" "Constantine." The single word was laden with fury. "The meeting was a setup. He kept me talking while his people moved into position. How many do you see on the monitors?" Elena forced herself to look at the screens, counting the figures moving through her home with military precision. 6, maybe 7. They're sweeping the rooms. Vincent and his team are fighting them off, but she watched in horror as one of Marco's men went down, blood blooming across his chest. They're outgunned. The panic room will hold. It's designed to withstand a sustained assault for up to 72 hours. Marco's voice was steady, the voice of a man who'd planned for exactly this scenario. "Stay away from the door, keep Lucas quiet, and don't open it for anyone except me. Do you understand?" "Yes, but Marco, I'm going to kill him for this," Marco said, and the cold certainty in his voice sent chills down Elena's spine. "I'm going to burn his entire organization to the ground. But first, I'm going to get you and our son out of there safely. 12 minutes, Elena. Hold on for 12 minutes." The line stayed open, and Elena could hear him barking orders to his driver, demanding more speed, coordinating with additional security teams. She turned her attention back to the monitors, watching the battle unfold in her living room. Vincent was good, better than good. He'd fallen back to a defensive position near the hallway that led to the bedrooms, using furniture for cover while his remaining men laid down suppressing fire. But Constantine's people were professionals too, advancing with tactical precision, clearing rooms with brutal efficiency. "They're getting closer," Elena said into the phone, trying to keep her voice steady for Lucas's sake. Her son had quieted, sensing her tension, his gray eyes wide and watchful. 9 minutes, Marco replied. "Vincent knows what he's doing. Trust him." Elena watched as Vincent took down one of the attackers with a headshot that would have made a sniper jealous, then immediately shifted position to avoid return fire. But there were too many of them, and they were spreading out, flanking his position. "Marco, they're going to reach the bedrooms." "The panic room door will hold," Marco insisted. "Elena, listen to me very carefully. In the weapons locker, there's a handgun on the top shelf. It's loaded, and the safety is on. I need you to get it and keep it ready, just in case." Elena's stomach lurched. "I don't know how to shoot." "Yes, you do. Remember the range sessions I made you do? 2 months of Sunday mornings before you said you'd had enough?" Marco's voice was patient, despite the urgency of the situation. "You hated it, but you were good at it. The muscle memory is there. Get the gun, Elena." She moved to the locker, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. The gun was exactly where Marco said it would be, a compact 9mm that fit her hand like it had been made for her, which, she realized with a jolt, it probably had been. "I have it. Good. Safety off. Safety. If anyone except me tries to come through that door, you aim center mass and you keep firing until the threat stops. Can you do that?" Elena looked at Lucas, strapped into his carrier, depending on her completely for his survival. "Yes, I can do that. That's my girl." There was something almost like pride in Marco's voice. 7 minutes. We're almost there." On the monitors, Elena watched Constantine's men breach the bedroom hallway. Vincent fell back again, his team down to just 2 others now. They were fighting a losing battle, buying time with their lives. One of the attackers approached the nursery door. He tried the handle, found it locked, then pulled back and kicked it hard enough to splinter the frame. Elena's breath caught in her throat as he entered the room, his weapon raised. He would see the panic room door immediately. He would know where they were. The man moved toward the biometric scanner, studying it with professional interest. Then he pulled something from his pocket, some kind of electronic device, and pressed it against the scanner. Elena watched in mounting horror as lights flickered across the device's screen. "Marco, one of them is trying to hack the panic room door." She heard Marco curse viciously. "It won't work. The system is hardened against that kind of intrusion. But Elena, if he tries to force it, if he uses explosives, you need to move to the far corner and shield Lucas with your body. Do you understand?" "I understand." Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. She moved to the corner farthest from the door, positioning herself between it and Lucas, the gun held in both hands the way Marco had taught her. The man at the door seemed to reach the same conclusion Marco had. The electronic approach wasn't working. He pulled back and spoke into a radio in rapid Russian. Elena didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. He was calling for backup, for heavier equipment, for explosives. "Marco, 5 minutes. I'm in the building, in the elevator. Vincent, can you hear me?" Through the monitors, Elena saw Vincent touch his earpiece. He said something she couldn't hear. Then he and his remaining men suddenly surged forward in a coordinated assault that caught Constantine's people off guard. It was a suicide move, a desperate gamble to buy time. And Elena watched with her heart in her throat as Vincent took down 2 attackers before taking a round to the shoulder. But it worked. The man at the panic room door rushed back toward the firefight, drawn by the sudden escalation. The nursery was empty again, at least for the moment. "Vincent's down," Elena reported, watching him slump against the wall, still firing despite the blood streaming down his arm. But he cleared them away from the panic room. "I'm in the hallway now," Marco said, and Elena could hear the controlled violence in his breathing. "Stay down. Stay quiet. This is about to get loud." The monitor showed Marco emerging from the elevator like an avenging angel. He wasn't alone. 4 men flanked him, all armed with automatic weapons, all moving with the same deadly precision as Constantine's attackers. But there was something different about Marco, something in the way he held his weapon and moved through space that spoke of absolute fury, barely contained. The battle that followed was short and brutal. Marco's team had the element of surprise and the advantage of knowing the terrain. They swept through the penthouse like a scythe through wheat, and Constantine's men, caught between Marco's assault and Vincent's defensive position, found themselves trapped in a crossfire they couldn't escape. Elena turned away from the monitors when it became too much, focusing instead on Lucas, stroking his soft hair and humming a lullaby tune to block out the sounds of violence. She counted her heartbeats, forced herself to breathe, and tried not to think about the men dying in her living room. Then silence fell, sudden and absolute. "Elena?" Marco's voice came through the phone, rough but steady. "It's over. I'm outside the panic room. I'm going to use my biometric key, and then I'm going to open the door. Don't shoot me." Despite everything, Elena almost laughed. "I won't." The locks disengaged with the same mechanical sound as before, and the door swung open to reveal Marco standing in the ruined nursery, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt splattered with blood that probably wasn't his own. His eyes found hers immediately, scanning her for injuries, then shifted to Lucas. "You're both okay?" Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Marco stepped into the panic room and she saw the tension drain from his shoulders. He reached for her and she went into his arms without thinking. Lucas pressed between them, the gun still clutched in her trembling hand. "I've got you," Marco murmured against her hair. "You're safe now. Both of you." Elena allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to fall apart, to shake and gasp and cling to Marco like he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. Then she pulled herself together, stepped back, and engaged the safety on the gun with fingers that had finally stopped trembling. Vincent? Alive. Wounded, but alive. My people are getting him medical attention. Marco took the gun from her, setting it aside carefully. The others, 2 dead, 1 critical. Konstantin's entire team is down. You killed them all? Yes. Marco said it without hesitation or remorse. They came into my home. They threatened my family. There was only ever going to be one outcome. Elena looked past him into the nursery, but Marco shifted to block her view. Don't. You don't need to see it. Let me get you and Lucas out of here first. He was right. Elena unbuckled Lucas from the carrier, holding him close as Marco led them through the penthouse. She kept her eyes straight ahead, not looking at the bodies or the blood or the shattered remnants of the life she'd been trying to build. Marco took them to his office, which had somehow remained untouched by the violence. He settled them on the leather sofa, then made a series of phone calls while Elena rocked Lucas and tried to process what had just happened. Cleanup crew will be here in 20 minutes, Marco said when he finished. We can't stay here tonight. I'm taking you to a safe house in Westchester. What about Konstantin? Marco's expression went cold. Konstantin made a choice tonight. He chose war, and now he's going to learn why that was a mistake. Marco, if you go after him, if you start an all-out war, how many more people die? How many more attacks do we face? Elena looked down at Lucas, who had finally fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted by the trauma of the evening. How do we keep him safe if you're constantly fighting? We keep him safe by eliminating the threat. Or you could try something else. Elena met Marco's eyes steadily. You could use tonight as leverage. Konstantin attacked you in your own home and failed. His entire team is dead. Yours survived. You're in a position of strength now. Maybe it's time to negotiate from that strength. Marco stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Negotiate? Elena, he tried to kill you and Lucas. He betrayed a peace meeting. He's past negotiation. Is he, or is he desperate? Elena shifted Lucas to her other shoulder, her mind working through possibilities. Think about it, Marco. He sent a team tonight knowing it would probably fail. That's not the action of a man who's confident in his position. That's the action of a man who's terrified of what you represent. Good. He should be terrified. But fear makes people do stupid, dangerous things. Fear leads to more attacks, more violence, more risk to Lucas. Elena leaned forward. But if you could find a way to address his fear, to give him something that makes you less of a threat, you could end this without burning down half of New York. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. You're asking me to show mercy to a man who just tried to murder my family. I'm asking you to be smart instead of just strong. Elena held his gaze. You've proven you can destroy him. Everyone knows that now. His own people know it, your people know it, every other organization in the city knows it. You've made your point. Now make peace from a position where you've already won. And if he sees it as weakness, if he takes mercy as an invitation to try again, then you crush him. Elena said it simply. But at least try the other way first, for Lucas, so he doesn't grow up in the middle of a war that never ends. Marco stood and paced to the window, looking out over the city that was his kingdom and his battlefield. Elena watched emotions play across his face, anger, consideration, calculation. She'd seen that look before, back when they were married, and she'd sometimes offer observations about his business that he'd initially dismiss before circling back to them days later. If I do this, he said finally, if I reach out to Konstantin with terms instead of bullets, I need something from you. What? Marco turned to face her. The truth, all of it. Why you really left, why you stayed gone, why you hid Lucas from me. Not the surface reasons about safety and fear, the real reasons. Elena's heart skipped. Marco, you want me to take a risk on diplomacy when every instinct I have is screaming for blood? Fine. But you take a risk too. You trust me with the truth you've been hiding for almost 2 years. It was fair, Elena realized. Terrifying, but fair. And if they were going to build any kind of real partnership for Lucas's sake, it had to be built on honesty. Okay, she whispered. But not here. Not tonight. When we get to the safe house, when Lucas is settled, I'll tell you everything. Marco nodded once. Then we have a deal. The safe house turned out to be a sprawling estate in Westchester, surrounded by walls and gates and enough security to make Fort Knox jealous. Marco's people had it swept and cleared before they arrived, and by the time Elena carried Lucas through the front door, she was so exhausted she could barely see straight. A woman in her 50s greeted them, Mrs. Chen, the house manager, who took one look at Elena's face and immediately led her to a bedroom suite on the second floor. The room was beautiful in an impersonal way, decorated in neutral tones with expensive furniture that looked like it had never been used. "Mr. DeLuca's room is across the hall," Mrs. Chen said. "The nursery is connected to yours through that door. I've already had supplies brought in for the baby. If you need anything else, just use the intercom." After she left, Elena put Lucas down in the crib, watching him sleep with a fierce protectiveness that hadn't faded despite the crisis being over. He looked so peaceful, so innocent. He had no idea how close they'd come to disaster. A knock on the connecting door made her turn. Marco stood in the doorway, and for the first time that night, she really looked at him. He'd changed clothes, but there were still traces of blood on his hands, and his eyes held a weariness that went bone deep. "Is he okay?" Marco asked, moving to the crib. "He slept through most of it, thank God." Elena joined him, both of them looking down at their son. "Marco, I need to know, is Vincent really going to be all right? He took a bullet to the shoulder and another grazed his ribs, but he'll recover. He's already complaining about the hospital food, which the doctors say is a good sign." Marco's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "He saved your lives tonight. I won't forget that. None of your people should have had to die for us. They knew the risks when they took the job, and they died protecting what matters most to me." Marco's voice was quiet but firm. "I'd make the same sacrifice for them without hesitation." Elena believed him. That was the thing about Marco. For all his violence and ruthlessness, his loyalty to his people was absolute. "You said you wanted the truth," she said after a moment. "I'm ready to give it to you." Marco gestured to the seating area near the window, two armchairs facing each other across a small table. They settled into the chairs, and Elena gathered her thoughts, trying to figure out where to begin. "I left because I was afraid," she started, and Marco made a noise of impatience. "I know that part. Tell me something I don't know." Elena took a breath. "I left because I was afraid I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could watch you kill a man and then sit down to dinner. Someone who could justify violence and intimidation as necessary business practices. Someone who was losing herself in your world." Marco's expression didn't change. "Go on." "When I met you, I thought I understood what I was getting into. You were honest about who you were, what you did. I thought I could handle it, thought love would be enough to bridge the gap between your world and mine." Elena twisted her hands in her lap. "But I was wrong. Every day I spent with you, I felt myself changing, making compromises I'd sworn I'd never make, accepting things I'd once found unacceptable. And I realized that if I stayed, I'd eventually become someone I'd hate." "So you ran?" "So I ran," Elena confirmed. "And then I found out I was pregnant, and suddenly it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what kind of mother I wanted to be, what kind of world I wanted to raise my child in. I convinced myself that Lucas would be better off without knowing you, without being pulled into your world." "You were wrong about that too." "I was wrong about a lot of things." Elena met his eyes. "But here's the part I've never admitted to anyone, not even myself until recently. I didn't just leave because I was afraid of your world. I left because I was afraid of how much I loved you, despite everything. I was terrified that my love for you would make me compromise every principle I'd ever held, that I'd sacrifice my entire identity just to stay by your side." Marco leaned forward. "And now?" "Now I realize that love and identity don't have to be mutually exclusive. That I can love you, or at least work with you, respect you, partner with you, without losing myself." Elena's voice strengthened. "I'm not the same woman who left. I'm harder now, more realistic about the world. But I'm also not going to become someone who just goes along with everything you say because it's easier than fighting." "I never wanted you to be that person," Marco said quietly. "I married you because you challenged me, Elena. Because you saw the world differently than everyone else in my life. You made me think, made me question, made me consider alternatives I'd never have seen on my own. Like negotiating with Constantine instead of going to war? Marco smiled slightly. Like that. You have a mind for strategy that most of my advisors lack. It's one of the things I... He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. It's one of the things I valued most about you. Elena heard what he didn't say, the words he'd almost used. It's one of the things I loved most about you. The sentiment hung in the air between them, acknowledged but not spoken. So what happens now? She asked. You reach out to Constantine? I reach out, set terms. Make it clear that tonight was his one free attempt, and if he tries again, I don't stop until his entire organization is ash. Marco's eyes were hard. But I'll offer him a path forward. Limited cooperation, clearly defined territories, mutual non-aggression. It's more than he deserves, but it's what Lucas deserves. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This could still go badly. Constantine might refuse, or worse, see it as weakness and double down. Marco stood, moving toward the door. But you're right. It's worth trying. And if it works, it'll be because you had the courage to suggest it when everyone else was calling for blood. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start rebuilding, and you're going to need your strength. After he left, Elena sat alone in the quiet room, processing everything that had happened. They'd survived an armed assault. Marco had listened to her counsel instead of just following his instincts, and she'd told him the truth she'd been hiding for almost 2 years. It felt like progress. Fragile, uncertain progress, but progress nonetheless. She checked on Lucas one more time, then fell into bed fully clothed, too exhausted to even consider changing. Sleep came quickly, heavy and dreamless. The sleep of someone who'd survived something terrible and needed her body to shut down before her mind could fully process it. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and she could hear voices downstairs. She checked Lucas, still sleeping peacefully, then made her way to the first floor. Marco was in the dining room with Vincent, whose arm was in a sling, but who otherwise looked remarkably intact for someone who'd been shot twice the night before. They were reviewing documents spread across the table, and both men looked up when Elena entered. Mrs. DeLuca, Vincent greeted her with a slight smile. Good to see you in one piece. You too, Vincent. Thank you for last night, for protecting us. Vincent shrugged, then winced at the movement. Just doing my job, ma'am. It was more than a job, and you know it. Elena moved to the coffee service, pouring herself a cup with hands that were steadier than yesterday. Marco told me you're going to be okay. Takes more than a couple bullets to keep me down. Vincent gathered the documents, clearly recognizing a dismissal when he saw one. Boss, I'll be in the security office if you need me. After he left, Marco gestured for Elena to join him at the table. I've drafted terms for Constantine. Want to review them before I send them? Elena read through the document, impressed despite herself by the thoroughness of Marco's proposal. He'd outlined clear territorial divisions, established protocols for resolving disputes without violence, and even suggested areas of potential cooperation that would benefit both organizations. This is good, she said. Better than good. He'd be an idiot to refuse. He might be exactly that kind of idiot. Marco took the document back. But we'll find out soon enough. I'm having it delivered this afternoon. The rest of the day passed in strange domesticity. Elena spent time with Lucas while Marco worked from the estate's office, coordinating his business and managing the fallout from the previous night's attack. They had lunch together on the terrace, talking about Lucas's development and carefully avoiding any mention of violence or danger. It was almost normal, almost like they were a regular family spending a quiet day at their country house. The illusion shattered at 4 p.m. when Vincent appeared with a phone. Constantine's calling. He wants to talk to you directly. Marco took the phone, his expression going cold and professional. Volkov. Elena couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Marco's face for clues. His eyes narrowed at something Constantine said, and his free hand clenched into a fist. Then, slowly, some of the tension eased from his shoulders. Those terms are acceptable, Marco said after several minutes. We'll meet in person to finalize everything. Neutral ground, minimal security, and Volkov. This is the last chance. If you betray this agreement, there won't be negotiations. There will only be war. He ended the call and looked at Elena. He agreed to everything. He's even willing to provide intelligence on the people who gave him the information about Lucas in the first place. That's incredible. Elena felt relief wash over her. So it's over? The threat is neutralized? For now. Marco set the phone down carefully. But Elena, you need to understand. This is always going to be our reality. There will always be threats, always be people looking for weakness, always be danger. What happened last night won't be the last crisis we face. I know. And she did know, had accepted it somewhere in the chaos of the previous evening. But we face it together, as partners, as Lucas's parents. Marco studied her face for a long moment. You're really staying? This isn't just trauma bonding or fear talking? I'm really staying, Elena said it with certainty. Not because I'm afraid to leave, and not because I think I don't have a choice. I'm staying because Lucas deserves both his parents, and because I think we might actually be able to make this work if we both try. I'm going to hold you to that, Marco warned. No more running when things get hard. No more running, Elena agreed. But also no more treating me like I'm just another asset to manage. I'm your partner in this, Marco. Equal say, equal respect. Marco extended his hand across the table. Partners. Elena took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, the calluses that spoke of violence and power. But she also felt the gentleness, the care he took not to hurt her despite being able to break bones without effort. They shook on it, and something fundamental shifted between them. Not back to what they'd been before. They could never go back to that. But forward into something new, something built on hard truths and earned trust instead of romance and illusion. It wasn't the happy ending Elena had once imagined. But standing there in the sunlight with Marco's hand in hers and Lucas sleeping peacefully upstairs, she thought it might be something better. It might be real. The meeting with Constantine was scheduled for 3 days later at a private club in the meatpacking district, chosen specifically because it was owned by neither organization and had a reputation for discretion that bordered on legendary. Marco spent those 3 days in careful preparation, reviewing intelligence reports and consulting with his advisors while Elena watched him transform back into the crime lord she'd first met. Cold, calculating, absolutely certain of his power. But there were differences now. He consulted her on strategy, asked her opinion on the proposed terms, and actually listened when she suggested modifications. They worked together in his office late into the evenings, Lucas sleeping in a portable crib nearby, and Elena found herself falling into a rhythm with Marco that felt almost natural. You're thinking too small, she said on the second night, pointing to a clause in the agreement about territorial boundaries. Constantine controls the ports on the east side. You control distribution in Manhattan. Why not propose a joint venture? You get access to his shipping infrastructure. He gets access to your distribution network. Everyone makes more money and you build in a financial incentive for cooperation. Marco studied the document, his eyes sharp. That would require significant trust, sharing that kind of operational access. Which is exactly why it works as a peace offering. You're showing him you're willing to be vulnerable, which makes him more likely to reciprocate. Elena leaned back in her chair. Plus, if he's making money off your cooperation, he's less likely to jeopardize it with violence. You're thinking like a crime boss, Marco observed, and there was something almost like admiration in his tone. It's unsettling. I'm thinking like someone who wants my son to grow up without dodging bullets, Elena corrected. There's a difference. Marco added the clause to the document, and Elena felt a small surge of satisfaction. This was what partnership looked like. Two people with different strengths working toward a common goal. It wasn't romantic, but it was effective. On the morning of the meeting, Elena woke to find Marco already dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal gray with a tie that probably cost more than her first car. He was checking his weapon, a sleek black pistol that he slid into a shoulder holster with practiced ease. You're bringing a gun to a peace negotiation? Elena asked from the doorway. I'm bringing a gun to a meeting with a man who tried to kill my family 3 days ago, Marco corrected. Peace negotiation is just the framework. Reality is, I don't trust him, he doesn't trust me, and we're both going in armed and ready for betrayal. That's bleak. That's survival. Marco adjusted his jacket to conceal the holster. Vincent will be with me, plus 2 others. Constantine will have the same. The club's security will confiscate any additional weapons at the door. Elena moved into the room, straightening Marco's tie even though it didn't need it. The gesture was automatic, a remnant of their married life, and they both froze for a moment when she realized what she'd done. "Sorry," she said, starting to pull back. Marco caught her hand, holding it against his chest. "Don't be. It's nice. Familiar?" They stood like that for a moment, close enough that Elena could feel Marco's heartbeat under her palm, steady and strong. There was something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time, something vulnerable beneath the armor he showed the world. "Be careful today," she said quietly. "Lucas needs his father, and we need you to come home safely." "I will." Marco released her hand, but his fingers lingered for just a moment longer than necessary. "I have too much to lose now to be reckless." After he left, Elena spent the morning trying not to obsess over every possible way the meeting could go wrong. She played with Lucas, read him books, took him for a walk around the estate's grounds under the watchful eyes of the security team Marco had left behind. But her mind kept drifting back to that club in the meatpacking district, to 2 powerful men sitting across a table from each other with years of animosity between them. Vincent called at noon with an update. "Meeting started on time. Both parties are being civil. No signs of trouble." "How does Marco seem?" Elena asked, hating the anxiety in her voice. "Cool as ice, ma'am. He's presenting your joint venture proposal now." Vincent paused. "Constantine's actually listening, which is more than I expected." Elena spent the next 3 hours in Marco's office, trying to work on the resume she'd been neglecting, but mostly just staring at her laptop screen while her mind raced through scenarios. When her phone finally rang with Marco's number, she answered before the first ring finished. "How did it go?" "Better than expected." Marco sounded tired but satisfied. "Constantine agreed to the main terms and seems genuinely interested in the joint venture. We're setting up a trial period, 6 months to see if we can actually work together without killing each other." "That's wonderful, Marco. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, surprising herself with the intensity of her relief. "That's really wonderful." "Don't celebrate yet. This is just the beginning. We still have to make it work in practice." But there was something lighter in Marco's voice, as if a weight he'd been carrying for years had finally eased. "I'm on my way back now. We'll talk more when I get there." Elena hung up and allowed herself a moment of pure relief. They'd done it. They'd found a path forward that didn't require constant warfare. Lucas would grow up in a world that was still dangerous, still complicated, but at least marginally more stable than it had been a week ago. She was feeding Lucas his afternoon bottle when Marco returned, and he came straight to the nursery, loosening his tie as he walked. He looked exhausted, but there was a satisfaction in his expression that she rarely saw. "Tell me everything," Elena said, shifting Lucas so Marco could sit beside her. Marco detailed the meeting, how Constantine had arrived with the same wary professionalism, how they'd spent the first hour dancing around the real issues before finally addressing them directly, how Elena's joint venture proposal had been the turning point that shifted the conversation from antagonistic to collaborative. "He actually thanked me for the opportunity," Marco said, sounding slightly amazed. "Said he'd been looking for a way to expand his distribution, but didn't have the infrastructure. Your idea gave him that without requiring him to build it from scratch." "So everyone wins." "Everyone wins," Marco agreed. He reached out and gently touched Lucas's cheek, his expression softening. "Your mother might have just prevented a war, little man. She's smarter than both Constantine and me combined." Lucas responded by spitting up on his bib, and both Elena and Marco laughed, the kind of genuine, unguarded laughter that felt almost foreign after so much tension. "I need to tell you something," Marco said after a moment, his tone shifting to something more serious. During the meeting, Constantine revealed who gave him the information about Lucas. Elena's stomach tightened. "Who?" "My cousin, Antonio." Marco's jaw was hard. "He's been feeding information to Constantine for the past 6 months, hoping to position himself as my successor by making me look weak and disorganized. Learning about Lucas gave him the perfect ammunition." "What are you going to do?" "What I have to do." Marco's voice was flat. He betrayed the family. There's only one response to that. Elena understood what he meant, and part of her, the part that had grown up far from this world, wanted to protest. But the larger part, the part that had held Lucas while bullets flew and had hidden in a panic room wondering if she'd die that night, couldn't summon the energy to argue against justice for the man who'd nearly gotten them killed. When? Was all she asked. Soon, but not today. Marco stood, rolling his shoulders as if trying to shake off the weight of the decision. Today, I'm going to spend time with my son and try to remember what I'm building all of this for. They spent the rest of the afternoon as something almost resembling a normal family. Marco played with Lucas on a blanket in the garden while Elena watched from a nearby bench, and for a few hours the violence and danger faded into background noise. Lucas laughed at his father's silly faces, grabbed at Marco's fingers with his small hands, and generally charmed them both completely. He has your determination, Elena observed, as Lucas stubbornly tried to reach a toy that was just out of grasp. He has your intelligence, Marco countered, watching as Lucas figured out how to scoot closer to the toy. Look at that, problem solving at 9 months old. He's going to be trouble when he's older. The best kind of trouble. Marco picked Lucas up, settling him on his lap. Smart enough to question everything, strong enough to stand his ground. He'll be better than both of us. Elena heard the hope in Marco's voice, the dream of a son who could take the best parts of both his parents and forge something new. It was the same hope she'd been nurturing since the moment she'd learned she was pregnant. That evening, after Lucas was asleep, Elena and Marco found themselves in the estate's library, sharing a bottle of wine that was probably worth more than Elena's monthly salary had been in Boston. They'd fallen into this pattern over the past few days, late evening conversations after Lucas was down, talking about everything except the elephant in the room. We need to discuss logistics, Marco said, swirling wine in his glass. The penthouse is being renovated after the attack. It'll be ready in 2 weeks, but I'm thinking we might want to stay here instead, at least for a while. Elena looked around the library, taking in the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable furniture. It's peaceful here. Safer, probably. Definitely safer. And it gives Lucas more space to grow. A yard to play in eventually. Marco paused. What I'm asking is, do you see yourself staying here, long term? Are you asking if I'm going to run again? I'm asking if you're happy, or at least content. Because if you're not, if you're just going through the motions until you can escape, I need to know that now. Elena considered the question seriously, thinking about the past week and everything that had happened. She'd been shot at, threatened, terrified for her child's life. She'd also been heard, respected, treated as an equal partner in decisions that affected all of them. She'd watched Marco be both ruthlessly violent and surprisingly gentle, often within the same hour. I'm not going to lie and say I love this life, she said carefully. I don't love the violence or the constant security or the knowledge that there are people out there who'd hurt Lucas just to get to you. But I do love that boy sleeping upstairs, and I respect what we're building together. Is that enough? It's more honest than most marriages start with, Marco said dryly. And for what it's worth, I'm not going to lie either. I wish you loved me the way you did when we first got married. When you looked at me like I hung the moon instead of like I'm a necessary evil you're tolerating for Lucas's sake. The admission caught Elena off guard. She'd assumed Marco had moved past whatever feelings he'd once had for her, had relegated her to the role of co-parent and occasional strategic advisor. Hearing that he still wanted more, still remembered what they'd had, it complicated things in ways she wasn't sure she was ready to address. Marco, don't. He held up a hand. Don't try to spare my feelings or explain why it's impossible. I know all the reasons. I'm just telling you the truth because we promised honesty. He drained his wine glass. I still love you, Elena. I probably never stopped, but I also understand that love isn't always enough, and I'm willing to accept what you can give rather than lose you completely. Elena set down her own glass, her hands trembling slightly. That's not fair. None of this is fair, but it's real. Marco stood, moving toward the door. Think about it. Not whether you can love me back, that's not something you can force. But whether you can see a future where we're more than just co-parents managing a situation. Because if you can't, I need to adjust my expectations accordingly. After he left, Elena sat alone in the library for a long time, turning his words over in her mind. Did she still love Marco? The question was more complicated than it should have been. She'd loved the man she married, charming, powerful, attentive in ways that had made her feel like the center of the universe. But that man had also been capable of casual violence, of making decisions that affected lives without apparent remorse, of building an empire on activities she'd spent her whole life being taught were wrong. Could she love the whole person, not just the parts that fit her comfort zone? Could she accept the darkness that came with the light? She didn't have an answer. Not yet. The next morning brought news that Antonio had been found dead in his apartment, an apparent suicide that everyone understood was anything but. Marco was in his office when Vincent delivered the report, and Elena watched from the doorway as he read it with absolutely no visible emotion. "It's done?" was all Marco asked. "It's done," Vincent confirmed. "Clean, no blowback." Marco nodded once, then returned to the documents on his desk as if they'd been discussing the weather. Vincent left, pausing to give Elena a slight nod of acknowledgement as he passed. Elena entered the office and closed the door behind her. "Your cousin is dead." "My cousin betrayed his family and nearly got my son killed," Marco corrected without looking up. "The world is better without him in it." "Do you actually believe that, or is it just easier to tell yourself that?" Now Marco did look up, and his eyes were hard. "I believe that actions have consequences, and Antonio made his choice when he sold information to my enemy. What would you have preferred I do, Elena? Give him a stern talking to and hope he learned his lesson?" "I would have preferred you show some emotion about killing your own family member," Elena shot back. "Some indication that it affects you, that you're not just a machine processing threats and eliminating them." Marco stood, moving around the desk to face her directly. "You want emotion? Fine. I'm furious that someone I trusted, someone I grew up with, could betray me so completely. I'm devastated that family loyalty apparently means nothing to some people. And I'm relieved that the threat is neutralized and I can sleep tonight knowing one less person is trying to hurt my son." His voice was tight with controlled feeling. "But I don't get to wallow in those emotions, Elena. I don't get to mourn a traitor or second-guess decisions that keep my family safe. That's the price of leadership in my world." Elena saw the truth beneath his words, the cost of being who and what he was, the constant vigilance that never allowed for vulnerability. It would be easy to judge him for it, to condemn the coldness as moral failure. But she'd seen what happened when he let his guard down, had hidden in a panic room while men with guns invaded their home. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You're right. I don't get to judge your decisions when I benefit from the results." Marco's expression softened slightly. "I'm not asking you to approve. I'm just asking you to understand that this is who I am. This is the reality of the world Lucas was born into. And if you can't accept that, if you're always going to see me as a monster for doing what's necessary, maybe we need to reconsider this arrangement." "I don't think you're a monster," Elena said. "I think you're a man doing terrible things in a terrible world, and I think I'm starting to understand that the line between right and wrong is a lot blurrier than I used to believe." "That's progress, I suppose." Marco returned to his desk, but there was less tension in his shoulders. "For what it's worth, I don't enjoy the violence. I just refuse to be paralyzed by guilt over it." They didn't speak again until that evening, when Mrs. Chen informed them that they had a visitor, someone who'd cleared security and was requesting to see both of them. Elena followed Marco to the main entrance, curious and slightly apprehensive about who would show up unannounced. The woman standing in the foyer was in her mid-30s, elegantly dressed in a way that suggested money and taste in equal measure. But there was something harder beneath the polish, something in her eyes that reminded Elena of Marco, the look of someone who'd seen darkness and survived it. "Katerina," Marco said, his tone careful, "this is unexpected." "I imagine so." The woman's English carried the same Eastern European accent as the voice on the phone that had warned Elena about cracks in security. "May we speak privately?" Marco glanced at Elena, who realized with a shock that she was looking at the woman who'd called to warn her, the woman who'd been gentle even while delivering a threat. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Elena," Marco said. Katerina's eyes shifted to Elena, and something like approval flickered in them. Very well. I'm Konstantine's daughter, and I'm the one who gave your wife the warning before the attack. The revelation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Elena felt Marco tense beside her, his hand moving instinctively toward where his weapon would normally be. Explain, Marco commanded. Now. My father didn't authorize that attack, Katerina said. He was at your peace meeting, as agreed. But his second-in-command, Victor, saw an opportunity and took it. He sent the team to your penthouse, hoping to kill your family and derail any chance of cooperation between our organizations. And you knew about this? Marco's voice was dangerous. I discovered it hours before it happened. I tried to warn Mrs. DeLuca, tried to give her time to strengthen security, but Victor moved faster than I anticipated. Katerina's expression was grim. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm here to give you Victor's location so you can finish what you started. Elena stepped forward before Marco could respond. Why? Why warn me? Why give us Victor? What do you gain from this? Katerina met her eyes squarely. I gain a future where my father's organization doesn't destroy itself in a pointless war. Victor is old guard, stuck in old ways of thinking. He'll undermine any peace attempt because he believes violence is the only language worth speaking. If he's removed, the cooperation my father agreed to might actually have a chance. You're asking me to kill your father's second-in-command, Marco said flatly. I'm giving you the opportunity to eliminate a threat to both our organizations, Katerina corrected. What you do with that opportunity is your choice. But know that if Victor remains in power, he will try again. And next time, my warning might not reach you in time. Marco studied Katerina for a long moment, and Elena could practically see him weighing options, calculating risks, considering angles. Finally, he nodded once. Give Vincent the information. If it checks out, I'll handle Victor. Katerina pulled out a phone and began transferring data. While she worked, Elena caught her eye and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." The other woman's expression didn't change, but she inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. After Katerina left, Marco turned to Elena. She could be setting a trap. This could be exactly what Victor wants, me walking into an ambush. Or she could be telling the truth, Elena countered. She did warn me before the attack. If she'd wanted us dead, she could have just let it happen. Or the warning was cover, a way to establish credibility for exactly this moment. Marco rubbed his face tiredly. Everything is a game within a game in my world, Elena. Trust is a commodity more rare than diamonds. Then verify the information before you act, Elena suggested. Use your resources to confirm Victor was behind the attack. Make sure the location she gave you is legitimate. Don't walk into anything blind. Already planning on it, Marco pulled out his phone, calling Vincent to begin the verification process. While he worked, Elena excused herself to check on Lucas, needing the simple comfort of watching her son sleep. But she paused outside the office, listening to Marco coordinate his people with the same efficiency he brought to everything. He was planning what was essentially an execution, organizing it with the same calm professionalism someone else might use to plan a business meeting. And the disturbing part was that Elena was starting to understand why it was necessary. Victor had tried to kill her child. He'd sent armed men into their home with the express purpose of murdering a 9-month-old baby. Whether Marco eliminated him or not, whether the method was violence or negotiation or legal channels, the threat had to be addressed. That was the truth she'd been avoiding since the attack. That in Marco's world, some problems could only be solved one way. And she was either part of that world now, accepting its brutal logic, or she wasn't. There was no middle ground. Over the next 2 days, Marco's people verified every detail of Katerina's information. Victor had indeed organized the attack without Konstantine's knowledge or approval. The location she'd provided was legitimate, a warehouse Victor used as a secondary base of operations. Even the timeline matched. Victor had learned about the peace meeting and had seen it as a betrayal worth preventing by any means necessary. It's real, Vincent reported. Everything checks out. If we move in the next 48 hours, we can catch him before he relocates. Marco made the decision with the same cold certainty he brought to all his choices. Put together a team. We go tomorrow night. Clean, quiet, no witnesses. Elena knew better than to ask if she could talk him out of it. This wasn't a debate or a discussion. This was Marco doing what he did, what he'd always done, what he would continue doing as long as he lived in this world. But she could ask for one concession. "Don't tell me the details," she said that night as they sat in the library. "Handle it however you need to handle it, but I don't want to know how it happens. Is that fair?" Marco looked at her with something like gratitude. "That's more than fair. Thank you for not trying to stop me." "I'm not under any illusions that I could stop you, even if I wanted to," Elena said. "But Marco, be careful. Victor's going to expect retaliation. Don't give him the satisfaction of taking you down with him." "I won't. I have too much to live for now." Marco's eyes held hers. "Have you thought about what I said? About whether you can see a future for us beyond co-parenting?" Elena had thought about little else over the past 2 days. She'd examined her feelings from every angle, trying to separate what she wanted from what she thought she should want, what she feared from what was actually dangerous. "I'm still figuring it out," she admitted, "but I can tell you this, I don't hate the idea anymore. That's progress, isn't it?" "It's a start," Marco agreed, and for the first time in days, he smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. The man who was still in there, beneath the layers of violence and power and brutal pragmatism. The man she might, possibly, be able to love again if she could just find the courage to try. Marco left the estate at 10 o'clock the following night, dressed in black tactical gear that transformed him from businessman to soldier in seconds. Elena watched from the window as he climbed into an unmarked SUV with Vincent and 3 others, their faces set in grim determination. She held Lucas against her shoulder, one hand stroking his back as the vehicle's taillights disappeared down the long driveway. She'd asked not to know the details, but that didn't stop her imagination from filling in the blanks. Every minute that passed felt like an hour, and she found herself pacing the library with Lucas, unable to settle, unable to think about anything except Marco walking into danger. "Your father is either very brave or very stupid," she murmured to Lucas. "I haven't decided which yet." Lucas gurgled in response, completely unconcerned with the drama unfolding around him. Elena envied his ignorance, his ability to exist in the moment without the weight of past mistakes or future consequences. She'd been carrying that weight for so long now that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be free of it. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway with tea that Elena hadn't asked for, but accepted gratefully. The older woman had been with Marco's family for decades, had probably seen 100 nights like this one, and her calm presence was strangely comforting. "He always comes back," Mrs. Chen said simply. "Mr. DeLuca is many things, but careless isn't one of them." "There's a first time for everything," Elena said, but she took a sip of the tea and felt marginally better. 2 hours crawled by. Elena put Lucas down eventually, then returned to the library where she pretended to read while actually just staring at the same page over and over. At midnight, her phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. "Clean operation, no casualties on our side. Heading back." Elena's hands shook as she typed a response. "Marco? Unharmed. ETA 40 minutes. She allowed herself to breathe again, the tension that had been coiled in her chest finally loosening. Marco was safe. Victor was handled. The immediate threat was neutralized. They could move forward now, could start building something that wasn't just reaction to constant crisis. When Marco finally walked through the door at 12:45, Elena was waiting in the foyer. He looked tired, but unhurt. His tactical gear exchanged for a simple t-shirt and jeans. Their eyes met across the space, and something passed between them. Relief, understanding, maybe even the beginning of something deeper. "You're okay," Elena said, and it wasn't a question. "I'm okay." Marco moved toward her, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he just stood there, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. "It's done. Victor won't be a problem anymore." "I don't want to know." "I know." Marco's expression softened. "Thank you for waiting up." "Where else would I be?" Elena surprised herself with the admission. "You're Lucas's father. You matter to us, to me." Marco's eyes searched her face, looking for something she wasn't sure she was ready to give, but she didn't look away, didn't retreat into the defensive distance she'd been maintaining since her return. She let him see the truth she'd been hiding even from herself. She'd been terrified tonight, not just afraid for Lucas's safety or worried about the practical implications of Marco's death. She'd been scared of losing him specifically, of a world where Marco DeLuca didn't exist. And that fear told her everything she needed to know about feelings she'd been trying to deny. "Elena," Marco started, but she cut him off by stepping forward and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was brief, chaste, even by most standards, but it carried the weight of everything they'd been through together, every hurt and betrayal and moment of unexpected grace. When Elena pulled back, Marco looked stunned. "I'm still figuring this out," she said quickly. "I'm not making promises about forever or saying I'm back to being your wife in every sense, but I'm saying I want to try, actually try, not just coexist for Lucas's sake. Is that enough?" Marco's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. "It's more than enough. It's everything." They stood like that for a long moment, the grandfather clock in the hall ticking away seconds that felt suspended outside of normal time. Then Marco stepped back, creating space between them again, and Elena appreciated that he understood she needed to control the pace of whatever this was becoming. "I should shower," he said. "Wash off tonight." "I should sleep," Elena agreed. "Lucas will be up in 5 hours demanding breakfast." But neither of them moved immediately, caught in the fragile new reality they were creating. Finally, Marco turned toward the stairs, pausing at the first step. "Elena, I meant what I said before. I love you. I never stopped. And I'll wait as long as you need." After he left, Elena touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the ghost of that kiss. She'd crossed a line tonight, made a choice that changed everything. There was no going back to simple co-parenting now, no pretending they were just two people managing a situation. They were something more, something complicated and imperfect, and maybe even something that could work if they were both willing to meet in the middle. The next morning, Elena woke to find Marco already in the nursery, feeding Lucas his morning bottle while reading him stock reports like bedtime stories. It was such an absurd scene that she had to laugh, and Marco looked up with a grin that transformed his whole face. "He needs to understand market dynamics early," Marco said with mock seriousness. "It's never too soon to start his financial education." "He's 9 months old," Elena protested, moving to sit beside them. "He thinks his toes are fascinating. I don't think he's ready for portfolio diversification strategies." "You'd be surprised what babies absorb." Marco shifted Lucas so Elena could see him better. "Besides, he's already bored with children's books. I'm just adapting to his sophisticated tastes." Elena shook her head, still smiling. This was new too. Marco playful and relaxed, joking about their son instead of treating every moment with the weight of dynasty building. She liked this version of him, recognized him as the man she'd fallen in love with before the violence and fear had overshadowed everything else. "I talked to Constantine this morning," Marco said after a moment, his tone shifting to business. "He was grateful we handled the Victor situation. Apparently Victor had been positioning to overthrow him for months, and our intervention solved a problem Constantine didn't know how to address without starting a civil war in his own organization. So we did him a favor? We did each other a favor, and he's following through on the joint venture proposal with enthusiasm that actually seems genuine." Marco set aside the stock report. "We're meeting next week to finalize the operational details. I'd like you there." Elena blinked in surprise. "Why? I'm not part of your organization." "You came up with the strategy that made this cooperation possible. You understand the framework better than most of my advisors." Marco's eyes were serious now. "And honestly, I value your perspective. You see angles I miss, ask questions that need asking. I want you involved in this." It was, Elena realized, an enormous gesture of trust. Marco ran his empire with absolute control, rarely consulting anyone on major decisions. Inviting her into that inner circle, giving her a voice in strategy. It meant he saw her as more than just Lucas's mother or even a romantic partner he was trying to win back. He saw her as an equal, a partner in every sense of the word. "Okay," she said. "I'll be there." The week that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost sustainable. Elena spent mornings with Lucas while Marco handled business from his home office. Afternoons were dedicated to the joint venture planning, with Elena reviewing proposals and offering suggestions that Marco implemented more often than not. Evenings meant family dinners followed by quiet hours in the library where they talked about everything from Lucas's development to world politics to their own complicated history. They didn't kiss again, but there was a new easiness between them. Marco would touch her shoulder in passing, and Elena would lean into it instead of pulling away. She'd catch him watching her with Lucas and smile instead of feeling defensive. They were building something brick by brick, learning to trust each other again through small gestures and honest conversations. Margaret Chen, their counselor, noticed the shift immediately in their next session. "You two are actually talking to each other," she observed with satisfaction. "Really talking, not just negotiating terms of engagement." "We're trying," Elena said, glancing at Marco. "It's not perfect, but it's better." "Better is good. Better is progress." Margaret made a note. "Have you discussed what your relationship looks like going forward? Whether you're dating, reconciling, or something else entirely?" Marco and Elena exchanged looks. They hadn't put a label on whatever this was, hadn't defined the boundaries or expectations. "We're figuring it out as we go," Marco said finally. "No pressure, no timeline, just seeing where things lead naturally." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That's actually very healthy. You're both being honest about not having all the answers, which is more than most couples manage." She leaned forward. "But I do want to address something. Elena, you mentioned last session that you struggle with the violence inherent in Marco's work. How are you managing that now?" Elena took a breath, organizing her thoughts. "I've accepted that I can't change who Marco is or what he does. I can only decide whether I can live with it, and I think I can, as long as he's honest with me and doesn't expect me to participate directly in that side of his life." "And you're comfortable with that boundary?" Margaret asked Marco. "I am," he confirmed. "Elena doesn't need to be involved in the operational aspects of my business. She contributes in other ways, strategy, perspective, keeping me grounded. That's valuable enough without asking her to compromise her principles." It was the right answer, and Elena felt something in her chest loosen at hearing it. Marco understood what she needed, was willing to protect her from the parts of his world she couldn't stomach. That understanding meant more than any romantic gesture could have. The meeting with Constantine took place in a private dining room at the same club where they'd negotiated the initial peace. Elena dressed carefully for it, choosing a navy suit that conveyed professionalism without ostentation. Marco had briefed her thoroughly on what to expect, but she still felt butterflies as they walked into the room. Konstantin Volkov was older than Elena had pictured, mid-60s with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. But when he saw her, something in his expression shifted to what might have been respect. "Mrs. DeLuca," he said, his accent thick but his English clear. "Marco tells me you are the architect of our cooperation. I am pleased to finally meet you." "Mr. Volkov," Elena replied, shaking his offered hand firmly. "I'm glad we could find a mutually beneficial arrangement." They spent the next 3 hours hammering out details: shipping schedules, distribution networks, profit sharing, dispute resolution protocols. Elena found herself engaging directly with Konstantin's questions, offering solutions that hadn't occurred to anyone else, and generally holding her own in a room full of people who made their living through intimidation and force. At one point, Konstantin actually laughed at something she said, a genuine laugh that seemed to surprise his own people. "You have found a formidable partner, Marco," he said. "I almost regret that she is not working for me." "She's working with me, not for me," Marco corrected, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "There's a difference." After the meeting, as they drove back to Westchester, Marco reached over and took Elena's hand. "You were incredible in there," he said. "Konstantin's people are already calling you the Velvet Hammer. Soft approach, hard results." Elena laughed. "I'm not sure whether to be flattered or concerned." "Be flattered. In my world, earning a nickname means you've made an impression." Marco's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I meant what I said in there. You're not working for me. You're my partner. In business, in raising Lucas, in life. However much or little of that you're comfortable with." Elena looked at their joined hands, thinking about how far they'd come from that first panicked phone call in the hospital. "I think I'm comfortable with more than I expected to be." "Yeah?" Marco's voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the hope underneath. Yeah. Elena turned to face him. I'm not saying I'm ready to move back into your bedroom or make grand declarations about forever, but I am saying that what we have right now, this partnership, this friendship, this family we're building, it's good, and I want to see where it goes. Marco lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. That's more than I dared hope for a month ago. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, Elena's hand still in Marco's, both of them lost in thoughts of futures that were starting to look possible instead of impossible. 2 months passed in a blur of routine and small revelations. The joint venture with Constantine launched successfully, with both organizations seeing immediate benefits. The penthouse renovation finished, but Elena and Marco agreed to stay at the estate where Lucas had room to crawl and explore without hitting walls every 3 feet. And somewhere along the way, without either of them quite noticing when it happened, they transitioned from partners who shared space to partners who shared a life. It started small. Marco began kissing Elena goodbye in the mornings before leaving for meetings. Elena started waiting up for him when he worked late, sharing wine and conversation before bed. They fell into patterns of casual physical affection, hands brushing in passing, shoulders touching on the sofa, Marco's arm around Elena's waist during Lucas's bedtime routine. And then one night, after particularly good news about the joint venture's first quarterly profits, Elena found herself in Marco's room instead of her own. She stood in his doorway, second-guessing herself before Marco looked up from the book he'd been reading. "You okay?" he asked, setting the book aside. "Can I stay here tonight?" Elena asked, the words tumbling out before she could overthink them. "Just to sleep. I just want to be close to you." Marco's expression softened, and he pulled back the covers in invitation. "Come here." Elena climbed into bed beside him, settling against his chest as his arms came around her. It felt natural, right in a way that surprised her with its simplicity. She'd been building this moment up in her head as some kind of massive decision, but lying here with Marco's heartbeat steady under her ear, it just felt like coming home. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I don't know when it happened again, or maybe it never stopped happening, but I love you, Marco. All of you. Even the parts that scare me." Marco's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. I never stopped, even when I should have." They didn't make love that night. They just held each other, relearning the geography of shared space, rediscovering the comfort of not being alone. And when Elena woke in the morning to find Lucas's babbling coming through the monitor and Marco still wrapped around her, she felt something she hadn't felt in almost 2 years. She felt whole. The decision to remarry came not with grand gestures or dramatic proposals, but with a quiet conversation over breakfast while Lucas threw cereal at the dog Marco had recently brought home for him. "We're still legally married," Marco observed, watching Lucas giggle at the dog's attempts to catch flying Cheerios. "We never finalized the divorce." "I know," Elena said. "I should probably feel weird about that, but I don't. Want to make it official again. Not legally, that already is, but actually, ceremony, vows we mean this time. Commitment that's based on who we really are instead of who we thought we were." Elena considered it, turning the idea over in her mind. They'd already committed to each other in every way that mattered, raising Lucas together, building a life together, loving each other despite and because of all their complications. "Small ceremony," she said finally. "Just family and close friends. No pretense, no performance, just us promising to keep choosing each other every day." "I can do that," Marco agreed. "Though I reserve the right to buy you an obscenely expensive ring. I reserve the right to tell you it's too much. And I reserve the right to ignore you and buy it anyway." Elena laughed, leaning over to kiss him, while Lucas continued his serial assault on the increasingly enthusiastic dog. This was her life now, chaotic and dangerous, and built on compromises she'd never imagined making. But it was also full of love and laughter and moments of pure joy that made all the fear worthwhile. They held the ceremony 6 weeks later in the estate's garden, with only 24 people in attendance. Vincent stood as Marco's best man, still bearing a slight scar from the attack that had nearly killed him. Margaret Chen attended as both counselor and friend. watching with obvious satisfaction as her most challenging clients exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Elena's vows were simple and honest. She promised to stay even when things got hard, to speak her truth even when it was uncomfortable, to love Marco with clear eyes that saw all of him instead of just the parts that were easy to accept. Marco's vows were equally direct. He promised to listen even when he thought he knew better, to protect without controlling, to value Elena's strength as much as he valued her love. Lucas, oblivious to the significance of the moment, chose that exact second to take his first unassisted steps, stumbling from Vincent's arms toward his parents with a delighted shriek. The ceremony dissolved into chaos as everyone rushed to witness the milestone, and Elena laughed through tears as Marco scooped up their son and spun him around. "Perfect timing, little man," Marco said, kissing Lucas's dark hair. "Stealing the show at your parents' wedding." "He's your son," Elena said, but she was smiling. Dramatic entrances are in his DNA. That night, after all the guests had left and Lucas was finally asleep after the excitement of the day, Marco and Elena stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens where they'd just recommitted to each other. "No regrets?" Marco asked, his arm around her waist. "A few," Elena admitted. "I regret the time we lost. I regret that I ran instead of fighting for us. I regret that Lucas's first year was split between us instead of shared. But I don't regret where we ended up. Maybe we needed to break before we could build something stronger." Elena leaned into Marco's warmth. "We're better now than we were before. More honest, more equal, more real." "More real," Marco echoed. "I like that. No illusions about who we are or what this life requires." "Exactly." Elena turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. "I know you're a crime lord who does terrible things. You know I'm never going to be comfortable with all of it, and somehow we're making it work anyway." Marco caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "We're making it work because we respect each other enough to accept the whole package. You don't try to change me. I don't try to change you. We just meet in the middle," Elena finished. "Find the overlap in our Venn diagram and build our life there." "Exactly." Marco pulled her closer. "I have everything I need right here. You, Lucas, a partnership that actually works. The business can burn down tomorrow, and I'd still be the richest man in New York." "Let's maybe not tempt fate with talk of things burning down," Elena suggested. "We've had enough crisis for one lifetime." "Fair point." They stood together in the darkness, watching lights twinkle across the distant city skyline. Somewhere out there, threats still existed. Other criminals, law enforcement, the constant dangers of Marco's world. But for tonight, in this moment, they were safe and together and whole. 6 months later, Elena stood in the conference room of what had become their legitimate business venture, a consulting firm that helped navigate complex international partnerships. The joint venture with Constantine had been so successful that other organizations had approached them about similar arrangements, and Elena had seen an opportunity to build something legal and profitable from Marco's strategic mind and her diplomatic skills. Marco sat at the head of the table, listening to a presentation about expanding into European markets. Elena sat beside him, their hands linked under the table where no one could see, a private connection in a public setting. When the meeting ended, Constantine approached them with Katerina at his side. "My daughter has been asking when you will teach her your negotiation techniques," Constantine said to Elena. "She believes you have some secret method." "No secret," Elena replied, smiling at Katerina. "Just listening to what people actually want instead of what they say they want, then finding ways to give it to them." "This is more difficult than you make it sound," Katerina said, "but I would still like to learn." They made plans for Katerina to shadow Elena at the next major negotiation, and Elena found herself looking forward to it. She'd found her place in this world, not as Marco's wife trying to fit herself into his reality, but as her own person who brought value and perspective that complemented his strengths. That evening, Elena came home to find Lucas toddling around the living room under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye, chattering in the mix of English and Italian that Marco insisted on teaching him. He saw his mother and immediately changed direction, stumbling toward her with arms outstretched. "Mama! Mama home!" Elena scooped him up, breathing in his baby shampoo scent and feeling the solid weight of him in her arms. He was growing so fast, his personality emerging more every day. Marco's determination combined with Elena's curiosity, creating a tiny person who was wholly himself. "Where's your father?" she asked Mrs. Chen. "Office, taking a call. He said to tell you dinner's in 20 minutes. Elena carried Lucas to Marco's office, knocking once before entering. Marco was indeed on the phone, but he smiled when he saw them and gestured for them to come in. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, then hung up and opened his arms for Lucas. "There's my boy. Did you have a good day?" Lucas launched into an enthusiastic explanation of his day that consisted mostly of excited sounds and the occasional recognizable word. Marco listened with complete attention, responding as if he understood every word. "And what about you?" he asked Elena once Lucas had finished his tale. "How was the meeting?" "Productive. Katerina wants me to mentor her in negotiation, which I think could be valuable for maintaining the relationship with Constantine's organization." "Good thinking." Marco shifted Lucas to one arm so he could pull Elena closer with the other. "Look at us, building empires and raising a child. We're basically unstoppable." "We're basically exhausted," Elena corrected, but she was smiling. "Lucas, tell your father it's bedtime." "No bed," Lucas declared with all the authority of a 16-month-old who just learned the power of negation. "Yes, bed," Marco said, standing. "Come on, little man, let's go read about market corrections and their impact on portfolio diversification." "You're going to give him nightmares," Elena protested, following them toward the nursery. "He loves it. Watch, Lucas, want to hear about the Federal Reserve's monetary policy decisions?" "Yes, yes!" Lucas bounced excitedly, having no idea what his father was talking about, but loving the attention. Elena shook her head, watching Marco settle into the rocking chair with Lucas and pull out a copy of the Wall Street Journal. This was her life now. Absurd and beautiful, dangerous and domestic. Everything she'd never known she needed. After Lucas finally fell asleep, Elena and Marco retreated to their bedroom, the room they now shared without hesitation or second-guessing. Elena changed into pajamas, while Marco checked his phone for any urgent messages, a routine so familiar it felt like they'd been doing it for decades instead of months. "Vincent wants to know if you're free to review the new security protocols tomorrow," Marco said, scrolling through messages. "The ones for when Lucas starts preschool next year." Preschool? Our baby is going to preschool." Elena sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of time passing. "When did that happen?" "Somewhere between the armed assault and the remarriage ceremony," Marco said dryly. "Time moves fast when you're dodging bullets and building legitimate business ventures." Elena laughed, pulling Marco down beside her. "Do you ever miss it? The simple violence of your old life before I complicated everything?" Marco turned to face her, his expression serious. "Not even for a second." "You didn't complicate my life, Elena. You gave it meaning beyond power and money. You gave me a son who makes every day brighter. You gave me a partnership that challenges me to be better than I thought I could be." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "The violence was never simple. It was just empty. You filled that emptiness with something real." Elena kissed him then, pouring into it everything she felt but could never quite articulate, gratitude and love and fierce determination to protect what they'd built together. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "I'm glad I called you that night," she said quietly. "From the hospital. I'm glad I was brave enough to ask for help, even though I was terrified of what it would mean." "I'm glad you called too," Marco replied. "Even though it hurt to know you'd hidden Lucas from me. Even though I wanted to be furious with you. I'm glad because it gave us a second chance most people never get." They settled into bed together, Elena's head on Marco's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. Outside their window, security lights swept the grounds on their regular schedule, a reminder that danger still existed beyond these walls. But inside, they were safe and warm and together. "Marco," Elena said into the darkness. "Thank you for not giving up on us, even when I'd given up on myself." Marco's arms tightened around her. "I could never give up on you, Elena. You're the best decision I ever made, even when you left me. Especially when you came back." Elena closed her eyes, listening to Marco's heartbeat, and thought about all the paths that had led them to this moment. The mistakes and fears, the violence and redemption, the slow rebuilding of trust from shattered pieces. It hadn't been easy, and there would be more challenges ahead. There always were in Marco's world. But they would face those challenges together, as partners in every sense of the word. They would raise Lucas to be strong and smart and kind, despite the darkness that would always lurk at the edges of their life. They would continue building their legitimate business while managing the necessary evils of Marco's other enterprises. They would love each other with clear eyes and open hearts, accepting the whole truth instead of comfortable illusions. And somehow, impossibly, they would make it work. Because that's what families did. They fought for each other, forgave each other, and found ways to survive the fires that should have destroyed them. Elena had been forged in those fires, tempered into someone stronger than the woman who'd run to Boston with secrets and fear. Marco had been transformed too, softened in the places where he'd been too hard, learning to value partnership over control. And Lucas, beautiful, innocent Lucas, would grow up knowing he was loved by parents who'd fought their way back to each other for his sake, who'd chosen each other every day despite having every reason not to, who'd built a family from the wreckage of their first attempt and created something that was messy and imperfect and absolutely real. As Elena drifted towards sleep, Marco pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Sweet dreams, Mrs. DeLuca," he whispered. "Sweet dreams," she whispered back. And for the first time in almost 2 years, Elena's dreams were actually sweet, filled with visions of their future together, imperfect and dangerous and absolutely worth fighting for. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. There was no happily ever after, only happily right now with the promise to keep choosing each other tomorrow. But in a world built on violence and power, on betrayal and shifting alliances, that promise was the most precious thing they could offer. It was enough. It was everything. It was home.